I came to face down in wet tailings, listening to two men decide how long I had left. One said not to waste a beating on me, the cold would do it before morning. The other one laughed. He said the three women they had dumped in the coal ditch would be gone by morning too, and that one was a shame because two of them still had good faces. I have never wanted to kill anyone before. 34 years, not once. I wanted to kill that man with my hands, and I filed the feeling like a new debt. Then I opened my eyes. Nothing was where it should be. Wrong sky, wrong smell, hot metal overwrought. Wrong hands, split across every knuckle, black to the wrist with somebody else's ore. And then somebody else's life came in through the back of my head, all at once, like water into a hold. Three facts surfaced first, in order of weight. This city hated the face I was wearing and had earned the right. The body belonged to an informer, and in the coat there was one piece of bread. As for me, the man doing the wearing, I died at 34 at a desk collecting debts I did not own for people I did not like. 11 years of finding what a man cannot afford to lose and pressing there politely. I was very good, and I hated it. I knew what I had landed in before I finished dragging myself back toward the wash lamps. My old job, except here they skip the phone calls and put the debt around your throat where everyone can see it. They call the bottom tier the wash. Water, shade, and Q are the coin down here, and all three belong to men above you. I got in line for the evening share with the last workers because the body knew the line, even if I did not. That was when the tray went over. Not mine. A sorting tray 2 places up, tipped by a boy hurrying, or across wet stone. And a voice behind the lamps said, with real satisfaction, "There he is. The little rat cannot even walk straight." Xu Ping, youngest son of the house that owns the mine, sent down to learn the family trade and teaching himself this instead, silk boots on washstone. He did not ask who tipped the tray. He had already chosen. "Kneel," he said. "Pick every stone out of the mud and kneel while you do it, and thank me for the lesson when you finish." I ran the sum as I had run sums for 11 years. Refusing cost broken fingers and the ditch. Kneeling cost nothing I could not carry. Cheap humiliations are a loan you take when you plan to collect later. So I knelt, and the wash watched me do it, and I picked ore out of mud 1 stone at a time. Juer confirmed it, of course. My friend, by inheritance. He stepped out where the light was best and said he saw me tip it, clear as day. He shook his head sadly. Same breed as the body I wear. Gao Mu closed the show. Overseer of the wash, water in one fist, shade in the other, half the tier loving him because he feeds his own. He took my day share off the board as restitution for the ore. Fair is fair, he said, and the queue murmured, because to them it was. First evening then. Knees in the mud, day share gone, a city of strangers satisfied. Hold that evening somewhere safe. Out of it, and one shared loaf came the only hands in Sichuan that could make diamonds without a mine. I will give it to you in order. At cost. The coal ditch sits past the last heap, where the wash empties what it no longer counts. Spoiled ore, dead tools, and that week, people. I went because the man by the lamps had said 3 women, and because the other choice was sleeping on what I had heard. And I could not. They were there. Alive, barely, dumped like sacks with the collars still on. Culled stock of House Xue, written off. 2 of them had good faces, all 3 had maybe a night of cold left in them. I had 1 piece of bread and a body 2 meals short, and I will be honest about the arithmetic, it was not saintly. I stood in that ditch doing my old trade on myself, finding what I could not afford to lose. It came out to 3 strangers, breathing. I broke the bread 3 ways and fed it to them, and gave the smallest piece last, to the one who tried to refuse it. Then I hauled them, one at a time, out of the ditch and along to the warm side of the washhouse wall, where the furnace heat comes through the stone, and the night got strange. A panel opened in the air in front of me, quiet as a remembered name. 3 lines, 3 names. Suyin and 1 word, warmth. Bai Yue and 1 word, hands. Han Qiao and 2, a way out. No explanations came with it, no voice, no rules. A ledger had opened somewhere and decided I could read it, and being what I am, I read it. The first tier was Su Yin's. She woke enough to see another woman in the ditch, had not made it, and she cried once, hard, as tired people do, and the tear came off her cheek wrong. It came off heavy. It rang on the stone like a coin. I picked it up and held it to the wash lamps, and my borrowed memory told me what I was holding, and my own eyes refused it. A diamond. Small, cold, absolutely clear. In this city, a diamond is not a jewel. Nobody wears one at the throat. It goes into a blade so the blade can cut what it swore to cut, into a doorframe so the wrong man cannot cross it, into a collar so a person stays where they are put. Whoever makes the stones decides who is armed, who is safe, and who is chained. That is the entire government of Sichuan in one sentence. And one had just fallen out of a starving woman's eye into my palm in a ditch at night because of bread. The second came from Bai Yue. She woke, felt the collar still on her throat, and then looked at her own hands a long while, turning them over in the lamplight. Whatever she found there broke her quietly. Her tear came off heavy too. I caught it before it hit the mud. Han Chao did not cry. She watched me hold 2 impossible stones, and she ate her share of the bread to the last pinch, and only then, eyes open and on me, it happened anyway. 3rd stone. She looked more insulted than moved. I would learn this is her version of moved. 3 tears, 3 diamonds, 1 loaf. And under the 3 names, the panel wrote something smaller in the corner, like an afterthought. Grains, a dozen, and some. I had no idea what a grain was. I noted it anyway. I note everything. Then the bill arrived, and everything after runs on it. Their cold got up out of them and moved into me, their hunger too, not as a feeling, as a fact. I spent the rest of that night shaking against a warm wall, starving beside 3 people I had just fed, wearing the exact state I had lifted off them. Whatever kept this ledger did not do charity. It did transfers. I laughed once, alone at the shape of the joke because I had died a debt collector, and the afterlife had looked at my file and given me the same desk. Morning came up gray, and the 3 of them were alive in it. The 2 men by the tailings had priced all 4 of us at one cold night, and the price was wrong, and I have never in either life enjoyed anything as much as being someone's bad arithmetic. Now, water. 3 people cannot mend on bread that is gone. The well queue belonged to Gao Mu, my day share was confiscated, and beggars at that well get the ladle across the knuckles. So I stood where I could see the whole queue, and I read it. 11 years of reading rooms full of debtors teaches you what skimming looks like from behind. Gao Mu ran the water by tally, a man at the board marking shares with a stub of chalk. And the man at the board had a friend, and the friend's bucket went past twice. And a third of the difference walked off in a jug to the middle tier where it sold. The panel, for what it was worth, agreed with me about Gao Mu. I looked at him across the yard, and it gave me his name and one line, a way to stop it. Even his ledger entry was about theft. A king of a small dirty kingdom, being robbed in his own house, and too proud to say it out loud. I walked up to him at the board, in front of his own queue. You do not make a man like that a private offer. Private offers are deniable. I said, you are short a tenth every day and you count it as spillage. Then I said nothing, which is the oldest tool I own. The man who speaks after the pause is already bargaining. He spoke after the pause. He said, and what is it you think you know, rat? I said, not think. I can hand you the leak by name today with the full queue watching. Price is water for 4, daily, on the board, in chalk. He looked at me for a long moment, at my knees still wearing yesterday's mud. Then he said, name him. I named the tallyman's friend, and the jug, and the second pass of the bucket, and where the water went along the middle rows, loudly, because a crowd believes its ears. The queue checked me in real time. 40 heads turned to the tally board and did 40 days of arithmetic in one breath, and the noise they made was its own verdict. Gao Mu did not thank me. He broke the friend's jug on the wellstone, put the tallyman on half share for a season, and then, with the entire wash watching, he wrote 4 names on the waterboard in his own chalk. Mine and 3 women he had helped throw away 2 nights before. Restitution, he said. Fair is fair. The same words, pointed the other way. That was the first offer of this life, and I will not pretend I did not enjoy it. The man who took my day share handed me 4 shares back in front of the queue that watched me kneel. Inside, I was a professional coming back into form, and it felt disgracefully good. The women took the corner of the washhouse wall like soldiers taking ground, and immediately, before names or thanks, they had their first fight about bread, about how yesterday's loaf should have been divided. Han Chao argued shares by return on investment, hers highest, since she alone knew the roads out. Su Yin argued need, and gave her reasoning while checking Bai Yue's eyes and my knuckles without asking either of us. Bai Yue said the bread had been badly cut in the first place, uneven by a finger's width, and that a man who cuts like that should not be trusted with rations at all. I sat against the warm stone listening to 3 starving strangers litigate a loaf that no longer existed, and I understood I had not rescued 3 grateful women. I had acquired 3 unpaid auditors. It remains the best trade I have ever made. Su Yin would not leave the ditch behind either. She went back in daylight for the stranger who had died there and stood over the body until 2 washmen helped her carry it up, because you do not argue with the person who sets your bones for free. That was my first look at how Su Yin spends whatever power she has, all of it, always, on whoever in the yard stands lowest. Bai Yue said nothing about the ditch. She sat turning her freed hands over, working the fingers, wincing on the 3rd motion every time. The 3rd, never the 2nd or 4th. Later, I would learn what her collar does, and stop wondering why she watched her own hands like they belonged to a debtor. And Han Chao watched the road. She had eaten, she had drunk, and by her accounting that meant departure at dusk. She announced it to nobody. Nobody answered, and she did not leave, and both facts annoyed her visibly. Yanru came at dusk, which is when the house collects, because dusk makes torches necessary, and torches make an audience. A cart, 2 hired backs, and a slender man in gray who stepped over wash mud without looking at it. Second steward of House Xue. He had a scale hanging from his left hand, brass, small, the kind a man carries when his authority is that he measures. He set it on the waterboard, level, before he said one word. I have made versions of that move. It said, everything from here on is exact. He was there for the write-off. Cold stock, listed for the ditch, to be confirmed dead and struck. Instead, his list found 3 women alive at a warm wall with their names in chalk on a waterboard, fed, watered, breathing on somebody's coin. He did not get angry. Men like Yan Ru do not have anger, they have discrepancies. He asked the yard, mildly, who fed these 3? 40 people looked at me, which in this city is testimony, sworn and sealed. Then he worked the logic with the street listening step by step, like a man showing a proof. Written off stock has no owner. Stock that is fed has an owner, because feeding is a claim, and a claim is an assumption of the balance. He turned to me, polite as winter. You paid for them. Therefore you accepted what they owe. The house thanks you. He weighed a copper on his little scale while he said the figure. 40 taels of silver and 4 years of bound labor, owed by 3, now owed by 1. Payable by the season, first measure due in 20 days. He said 20 days as other men say good evening. Han Xiao made a sound at that, and Yan Ru turned to her and asked her mildly whether the sum was accurate to her knowledge, and I watched a woman who haggles with a knife at her throat answer him straight and immediately, her jaw fighting every word on its way out. Yes, to the copper. The collar at her throat sat there being obeyed. I noted that too, and it went cold down my back. Somewhere in that exchange was a rule, and the rule had teeth, and I did not yet know its shape. The elegant man with the scale could ask her questions, and her mouth belonged to him. He left as he came, exact and unhurried, and the cart took the dead stranger and left the living, because the living were now my expense. The wash went back to its water. Ju'er, I noticed, had watched the assessment from the 3rd row, changing which face he wore about it twice. So count the first 2 days with me. 3 women alive who were priced dead. 4 names in chalk on a waterboard that had my share struck off it a day before. 1 overseer robbed less and owing me in public. 1 piece of bread spent entire. Against that, 40 taels and 4 years on my name, first payment in 20 days. A body running on their hunger and their cold, and both of those debts due nightly. A friend I need to watch. An heir I made an enemy by kneeling too well, and a gray man with a scale who thinks I am a line in a ledger that finally adds. And in my coat, knotted into a rag, 3 small stones that fall out of weeping women and buy kingdoms. I knew one thing about diamonds in Sichuan, and the wash had taught it to me by example, in whispers, before my first sunrise. A man with a stone and no house behind him is not rich. He is evidence. He is a corpse that has not been collected yet, holding the reason. 20 days. 3 stones I could not show, could not sell, could not use, and no idea yet what a grain was, or why my ledger kept counting them while I hauled other people's cold on my own back, one night at a time. I fell asleep against the warm stone doing what I do. Arithmetic. It came out the same every way I ran it. The only coin I had was the kind that gets you killed for holding it, and the only way through was to learn, in 20 days, how to make a dead stone work. 19 days left, 3 stones in a rag, and not one person in Sichuan I could show them to. That was the whole balance sheet, and I had drawn up worse. Not many, though. The obvious road was the buyer's rows of the middle tier, where everything stolen in the city goes to be reborn with a clean face. Obvious roads out of debt have teeth in them. My old work taught me that. Hunger argued louder. I picked the smallest fence on the row, a man with careful eyes and a tray of dead men's buckles. I showed him one corner of one stone, under my palm, as you show a card. The air in that stall changed temperature. He did not look at the stone. He looked over my shoulder, once left, once right, and that was worse than shouting. He was checking who else had seen it. I was 3 steps gone before his hand came up. Nearly too late even so. 2 men rose off a bench across the row without hurrying. Men who do not hurry at the start know how these things end. I learned the middle tier at a dead run. 2 blocks of it, a fish cart, a rope yard, a wall I took on the second try with somebody's fingers brushing my heel. The voice came from above. Left at the die racks, it said. Calm as a ferry schedule. Roof beam, then the smoke shed. Move or be meat. Han Kiao, on a roof line in daylight, unimpressed, steering me through lanes she owned in her head. I went where the voice said, and the 2 men stopped existing behind me, and I sat in a smoke shed and shook. She dropped through the hatch and named her price before my breathing settled. Guiding fee, 1 favor, floating, to be called when she chose. I said, you came after me. She said, I invested in you yesterday. I protect my investments. Different thing entirely. That was the first time this life saved my neck, and the first favor I ever owed in it. She wrote both in the air between us with one look, and took me home the long dry way, lecturing every turn. A stranger with a diamond, she said, is one of two men, a mind thief or a man about to donate. There is no third person. Do you understand what you were doing down there? I said, learning. She said, learn cheaper. Old Fu found us at the wash wall that evening, or let himself be found. One arm, one eye that works, a face like a dropped pot. He had watched me haul 3 dying women out of a ditch and said nothing. Now he looked at the rag in my fist as if it smelled. Show me, he said. I hesitated, and he spat to one side and said, boy, half this yard already whispers you sleep on stones. The other half will sell you by market day. Speed matters more than trust now. Show me. I showed him. He turned the 3 over with his one thumb, grunted at 2, held the smallest to the lamp. A 2, he said, maybe less. Mine trash by weight, except mine trash is cloudy and this is clean as a lie. Where? I said, does it matter? He looked at me a long moment with the working eye. No, he said, not to me. To everyone else in this city, it is the only thing that matters. Remember that order of things. Then he gave me the lesson I had been trying to buy all day free in one sentence. A raw stone does nothing, boy, nothing. It is a dead tooth until somebody seats it in metal, and seating is fire, tools, and hands, and every hand that knows the craft in Sichuan eats from House Xue. I asked what a seated stone did. He said, depends what broke to make it, and that was the first time anyone said out loud what I held. Not treasure. Consequence. Fu agreed to try for half my day share, daily, eaten in front of me. The price, he said, of owning the only arm stupid enough. He seated the smallest stone that night into a splinter of oxbone, one-handed, swearing at the world. Crooked, he said when it was done. Fast work, bad bed. It will not hold a season. Tonight, it holds. He was right on all 3 counts, and one of the 3 saved a life before morning. Su Yin had been burning since the ditch and hiding it, because she ranks herself last in every line she runs, including the line for staying alive. By that night, the arm was hot to the wrist, red past the elbow, and she was setting a washboy's finger with it and lying about the color. Baiyu saw it first. She had not said one word in 2 days, and she did not say one then. She took Su Yin's wrist, turned it to the lamp, and looked at me. That look had instructions in it. The infection was past herbs, and the only healer Su Yin trusts is Su Yin. So I did the thing in the open, because there was no time to do it hidden. Bone splinter against the red arm, and I held it there, and the washwall crowd leaned in. The wound closed in about a minute. Not vanished. Closed, clean, the red line walking backward to the cut and going pale, while Su Yin watched it happen to her own arm with a healer's eyes, furious, taking notes. The crowd made 2 crowds. Half folded their fingers against ill luck and stepped back. The other half were already leaving, and I knew the walk of men going to sell something. I had been that walk. Su Yin flexed the arm, looked at me and said, dosage. How many uses? What does it cost? Who else knows? Not thank you. A supply question. I answered honestly, including the part where I did not know, and she nodded like a colleague and went back to the boy's finger. The knock on Fu's yard gate came at noon the next day, and it was not the watch. It was worse than the watch. It was a craftsman, with an audience already forming behind him. Master Kong, senior setter of House Xue, teacher of every hand in the city worth the word. He came with a tool roll under his arm, on foot, and Fu's yard filled behind him without anyone ordering it to. Craft is theater here. He asked for the thing, and I gave it, because refusing the politest man in the yard is how you volunteer for the impolite ones behind him. He held the raw stone to the sun, then over the yard fire, and looked through it at the flame for an age. Then he said it, to the whole yard, in a level voice, like a diagnosis. There is no such stone. Mine stone is born cloudy and clears in the cut. This was born clear. Therefore it is stolen from somewhere I do not know, or planted for a reason I do not care to learn. Either way, it does not belong here. And he turned to call his men in from the gate. Everything I own is worth less than what I said next, so I will give it word for word. I said, Master, one question first. He paused, because craftsmen pause for questions. I said, 40 years you have read stones. Read mine in your own furnace and tell me what ground it came from. That is my whole price. Keep the stone either way. Then I shut my mouth and let the pause do my old job for me. The yard held its breath. Kong looked at the stone, then at me, and I watched 40 years of certainty and one splinter of doubt argue behind his eyes. Curiosity won. It always wins in the good ones. He wrapped my stone in a cloth, said, the house will hear what the furnace says, and left without his men touching me. By evening, the tears were telling each other that Kong took the washrat's stone for testing. I want the count kept straight. I lost that exchange. 1 stone of 3, gone with the man most able to prove what I am, gone for a question he may answer to my grave. But I walked out of a closing trap on my own feet, and the trap walked away advertising me. On my books, that is a good bad day. Kong did not send an answer. He sent silence, and then he sent policy. Within 2 days, every forge and bench across the middle tier had received a visit and a quiet sentence and my name inside it. I know because Little Ba told me. He arrived in my life sideways, a 14-year-old off the wash heaps who had appointed himself my intelligence service the day the water board got 4 names. Nobody hired him. He invoices after. 7, he reported, sitting on our wall eating my bread. 7 forges, 7 doors, all shut to you. The 8th would not even open to hear the question. Old Kong walks slow, yet he walks everywhere. Then he held out his palm for wages. I paid him a crust and put him in the budget for good. So the trap had a shape now. I owned 2 impossible stones. Raw, they were rocks. Seated, they were power. And every pair of hands that could seat them answered to a man who had just told the city my stones should not exist. We held the war council at the wash wall that night, all 4 of us and the fire, and it went 3 directions at once, as it always would. Han Xiao said, "Sell. 10th price tonight to the ugliest fence I know and be on the north road by dawn. 1/10 of a fortune is a fortune and corpses hold full price badly. She always has the route planned." Su Yin said, "Spend." The far ditch had a man in it with a leg going the same road her arm had gone. 1 stone, 1 leg, 1 life, arithmetic done. She did not ask whose stone it was. It does not occur to her. And Bai Yue spoke. 2 days of silence, and her first words in this company were a craft inspection. She said, "Whoever seeded that splinter should be kept away from stone, bone, and shame. The bed is cut against the grain, the seed is proud by a hair, and the piece dies within a month." Then, quieter, looking at the fire, "It could have been beautiful. The stone deserved better hands." Fu, whose work it was, laughed until he wheezed, then said the only sensible sentence of the night. "She is right," he said, "and the hands she means are on her own arms and her collar stops them at the 3rd move. Ask her what she was before you spend anything." I did not ask, not yet. First, I watched Bai Yue turn her hands over in the firelight, and I put the last pieces where they already wanted to go. Best hands in the city, sitting at my fire, stopped by a ring of metal that only a working stone opens. And my stones only work through hands like hers. Aunt Ma completed my education in the meantime, free of charge, as plague is free. By week's end, all the lower tier had heard from her personally that the informer's boy now robs the mine itself, stones up his sleeves, mark her words. I did not deny it, which was the only clever thing I did all week. A denied rumor dies in a day, and mine was out there working for me, unpaid. You cannot find the man who makes impossible stones, but a mine thief with goods on him, that man can be found, and the people who need stone quietly had just been given an address. While I waited for that seed to sprout, I went to school on the grains. The panel kept counting them, a thin corner line that crept up whenever I spent something real. Gave my cue place to a coughing hauler, 2 grains. Carried Ba's sack the last stretch, a grain. Small coin for small costs. And grains, it turned out, could be spent. I pressed a pinch into a splinter of wood one night, thinking hard about Fu's door staying shut, and the splinter went warm, and the latch would not lift for a count of 60. Then the splinter crumbled to ash, the dust blew off my palm, and the ledger marked me a dozen grains poorer for 1 minute of shut door. A dozen grains, 1 minute, 1 door. Toy money. But it was the first thing in this world I had made alone, and I stood in the dark grinning at a ruined latch like a man holding his first wage. The man with money came on the 9th evening, middle tier by his boots, a carter's shoulders, 1 hand wrapped in a rag. He kept still. He stood at the edge of the washlight a long time before he crossed it. He did not ask my name. Names are evidence. He said, "They say a man here has stone that is not the house's. My brother's collar is killing him slow, and the house quoted us 4 years of binding for the fix. I have 11 tails and a cart." Then he stopped talking, and I recognized the manners of a man dealing with a criminal because he thought that is what I was. 11 tails against 40 owed and a fortune sitting dead in my rag. I told him to come back in 10 days and to tell nobody, and he laughed at that without joy. "Everybody already knows," he said. "That is why the queue starts tomorrow." So there it was, the cage, visible at last. A stone that could feed us all, dead as a tooth without a setter. The 1 setter in the city, not owned by House Xue, sitting at my own fire, stopped at the 3rd move by a collar, and the collar answers to a working stone, which needs her hands, which the collar stops. I drew the circle in the dirt by the fire that night and looked at it a long time. Every line of it ran through somebody else's fire. 19 days had worn down to 10, and Yanru's first measure would not wait on my circle. So run the count with me. One stone left, raw and useless. 11 tales promised that I could not earn without a seeded stone. 7 forges shut. One crooked splinter dying in a month, on the arm of a woman who sets bones for the poorest tier in the city. Fu put it in trade terms since nobody else would. You need fire that Kong does not own, boy, he said. There is none in Sichuan, so you will have to borrow somebody else's while they are not looking. He said it as a joke. I wrote it down as a plan. Every forge in Sichuan has a door, and every door had my name nailed to it. So I stopped shopping for doors and started shopping for windows. If Kong owned every fire in the city, I would borrow one of his while it slept. I should be plain about what I was planning, because I was raised on the other side of this ledger, and I knew its penalties by heart. Breaking into a house yard to use a house furnace is theft of fire, and theft of fire in this city is priced somewhere between a hand and a neck. That depends on who catches you and how their week went. I planned it anyway, because the arithmetic left nothing else. Yanru's measure was coming due, the carter's 11 taels needed a seeded stone to earn, and the only legal road to one ran through a man who told the city my stones should not exist. The window I found was called Yun Tai, and he was the most dangerous kind of source there is. An honest one with coal soot on his cuffs, young setter of the house, 3rd yard past the coal gate, the far one, the quiet one. Ba's children mapped his habits in 2 days. But the map I really used, Yun Tai drew himself, free, in daylight, to my face. I stood in his queue at the coal gate with a broken buckle and asked, like a man making conversation, whether the far yard ran a night shift. And he told me, fires banked at dusk, empty till the 2nd bell, watchman does 1 round and sleeps by the coal bin. He is proud of the schedule. He wrote half of it. He answered because hiding things does not occur to him. There are men so straight you can use them as tools. The shame of that sentence belongs to whoever says it, and I said it. Su Yin caught me drawing the yard in the dirt on the 2nd night and sat down across from me with her arms folded, which from her is a declaration of war. She said, "You are keeping Han Xiao out of this." I said, "Yes." She said, "Then you are lying to her with your whole body every day in her own house. Tell her the truth. She has earned it twice over." Bai Yue from the fire, without looking up, said one word. "No." Then she looked up and spent the word properly. "Anything said in front of that collar can be pulled out of it by the man who holds the chain," she said. "You are not protecting yourselves from her. You are protecting her from being the knife. Say nothing, and she stays innocent when it cuts." Su Yin said, "Innocent and insulted." Bai Yue said, "Insulted survives the winter." The two of them looked at me to break the tie, and I sat there between 2 kinds of right and chose the quiet one, because quiet was what I knew from the old life. Mark it in the file. The raid was just money. This was the first time I decided what a person could bear to know on her behalf, and called it protection. Han Kao knew something was moving, of course. She priced the silences at our fire all week, out loud, to nobody. "Bread short by a 5th, she said. "Fu sober 2 nights running. Somebody is saving for something." Nobody answered her, and she wrote the non-answer down somewhere behind her eyes. The plan itself was clean, as plans are before people touch them. In through the tailings gap, over the low wall where the coal cart scarred it. 1 hour of banked fire, Fu's tools, my hands under Fu's mouth telling them what to do, out before the 2nd bell. Ba's children on 3 corners with whistles. And while I was counting my hour of stolen fire, Yan Ru was walking his book. I did not see it, so I will tell it the way it reached me after, from Ba's corners and a night of piecing. Collection season. Yan Ru walks the debtor list in person, door to door, in order, skipping no one. Because in his accounting, there is no such thing as a small entry. Most stewards work the fat entries and let the thin ones slide a season. This one stood in doorways of people who owed a copper and weighed the copper. And somewhere on that list, between a dyer and a netmaker, was a courier with a collar he held the chain of. He did not come to her with suspicion. That is the horror of the man. He came with the next line of the book, asked his standard questions. Then, because his book placed her at the informer boy's fire, he asked one more. "What is he preparing?" And her mouth answered. Not everything. She did not know everything, I had seen to that, and the seeing to is its own line in my file. Still, she knew bread was short, and Fu was sober, and I had asked one question about coal gates. Her jaw fought. The collar did not negotiate. He thanked her, mildly, and moved to the next name. She came home that evening and said nothing, because saying it would have meant explaining what her collar does, and the woman would rather be thought cold than be known ownable. I went over the wall 2 nights later into a yard that was awake and waiting for me. The house does not do loud. The fires were banked wrong, too even, tended an hour past their schedule. There was a man in the coal bin shadow who stood like a wall pretending to be furniture, and a second one where the cart scars made the climbing easy, placed exactly where a climbing man would land. I hung on that wall in the dark, reading the yard like a bad contract, every clause of it saying they knew. and the cold went through me in two waves. First, we were burned. Second, worse. If they knew the hour, they knew the source, and if I could work out the source, so could the man who owned her chain. A yard full of housemen, and the schedule they were working from had Yuntai's handwriting all through it. If they took me quietly at the far wall, the ledger would want a second name, and the second name would be the honest fool who talked schedules at his own gate. So I did the one thing that made no sense to a waiting trap. I made noise on the wrong side of the yard. I went along the outer wall to the alley side, away from the fire and the coal gate, and I put my elbow through the glazier's rack, and I let two of Ba's whistles scream fox on the corners. Then I ran, loudly, badly, like a thief who had come for copper pans and lost his nerve. The yard emptied after me, all of it, both shadows and three more I had not seen. I took them on a tour of the tailings I knew, and they did not. Lost a sleeve, kept the arms that were in it, and went into a drain Ba had shown me with a collector's pride. Face down in that pipe, listening to houseboots argue over my direction, I did the sums. The raid was dead. The fire was dead. My shoulder was cut and my sleeve was evidence. And on the credit side, one line. No one was standing in the far yard wondering why the house found the exact hour, and no one would walk that wonder back to a young setter's honest mouth. I had gone in for a stone and come out with a fool's jacket and a clean conscience on one point of one page. Some nights that is the entire profit column. The next evening, Yanru came to the washwall, and he came alone, which frightened me more than the yard had. He crossed the tailings without haste. No cart, no hired backs. Just the gray man and the scale at our fire, standing like the smoke was a room he owned. He looked at my torn shoulder without surprise. He carries his book behind his eyes and on a string of small brass weights, and the string clicked once as he found my entry. The first measure stands unpaid, he said, as if reporting weather. 10 days of grace were extended by custom. The grace is spent. I am not sure the yard existed for him. The only crime he recognizes is a number that does not arrive. I offered him the truth, which is a tool like any other. Work is coming, I said. 11 tales of it inside a week, more behind it. The debt will be met. I need days, not mercy. He listened as a scale listens. Then he said the thing he had come to say, and he said it at talking volume in everyone's hearing, because in this city, a sentence needs witnesses to be real. Days you may have, he said. 30 of them, at interest. And hear the security. If the balance stands short on the 30th morning, the 3 bound women attached to your entry transfer to the deep lists. The quiet floor takes deliveries at the new moon. He said, quiet floor as a carter says South Road. A place name, a schedule. Nobody at our fire knew what it meant, and he filed our not knowing as adequate. Then he weighed out the interest against a brass weight. He named the new total, 43 taels, bowed the width of a coin, and walked into the dark. He left behind him the first thing he had ever given us for free, a name we would spend the rest of the year learning the size of, syllable by syllable, at prices nobody posted. He spent it like small coin. Han Xiao broke the silence. She said, flat. The deep lists are a story. People go down the mine and come back with double pay and no tongue for where. It is storage. It is nothing. And she said it too fast, 3 facts in a row, which, from her, is a scream. Then it came apart at our fire, quietly, as real damage does, because she did the arithmetic nobody had said out loud, and she is faster than all of us. The yard knew the hour. 3 had said it, all in the yard team. She had not been given the hour, only the edges, and she had spent an evening answering a mild man's questions. She looked at me and said, "You knew. Not tonight, before. You have been keeping me outside since the water board. And you built this whole month around a hole shaped like me." And I said, yes. Because lying to her twice in 1 week was more than my stomach held. Suyin looked into the fire. Bai Yue looked at nothing, which is how she looks when she is right and hates it. Han Xiao nodded slowly as you nod at a price you knew was coming. She said, the next such price, tell me what I am. A person you trust is one thing, a tool you work around is another. Both survive, but a tool that thinks it is a person breaks wrong. Then she rolled into her corner with her back to the fire, and the crack that would cost us all a winter was open and drawing air. I had cut it myself, with the quiet I chose on night 2. The blanket happened that same night, and I put it here deliberately because this is where it sat. 1 blanket, 4 people, first cold snap, all of us in Fu's shed because nobody wanted to be alone with the words still in the air. Su Yin allocated the blanket by triage, coldest sleeper first, which was by Yue. She refused it on the grounds that the weave was loose and the warmth rating exaggerated. Han Chao, from her corner without turning over, ran an auction. Opening bid, 1 favor. The blanket appreciates nightly. Fu bid a curse. I abstained, which cost me standing with all 3. And while the 3 argument systems fought to a standstill, something pale and blind came out of the tailings dark. It was the size of a dog. It walked over all of us with cold feet, turned twice on the disputed blanket, and went to sleep. A digger beast off the heaps. Eyeless, colorless, calm as a tax. Fu said, "That is a boss animal. They smell grief and dig it out, mind your boots." It did not smell like it planned to leave. Su Yin ruled the auction settled in favor of the animal, unanimously, and the strange thing is, the shed went easier after. It is hard to keep a war going over a blanket with a fat, blind creature snoring on the verdict. We named him Boss because he took the best betting on the first night and has audited our food since. Every household needs one member nobody can argue with. I lay awake against the wall doing the month's books, and they were ugly in a new way, which at least made a change. Debit after debit, my name on each. The raid failed. The fire still Kongs all of it. Yuntai, clean and worth the sleeve. Han Xiao, half lost by my own choice of silences. The debt, grown from 40 to 43 and armed now with a date and a place name. 30 days. The quiet floor, the new moon, and 1 entry on the far page, small and stubborn. The trap had needed 5 men, a false schedule and an owned mouth to beat me, and I had still walked out with everything they could not afford to take. My hands, my stones, and the exact shape of how they had done it. Yanru had taught me his whole method in 1 evening. Free. He wins by asking his property questions, which meant the board was readable now. Every plan I made would leak through 1 collar until that collar came off, and the collar came off with a stone I could not seat, in a fire I did not own. Round the circle went again, 1 turn tighter. Yet circles that tighten are circles you can finally measure, and measuring is my trade. Somewhere above us, in a yard I would never break into again, an honest boy banked his fires on schedule and slept well. He did not know he was the one thing I had gotten out whole. Fire first, then. Bought, built, or married into, never again borrowed. I fell asleep pricing furnaces, and the last thought before sleep was almost cheerful, which measured how far my standards had traveled. 30 days on the wall in notches nobody had cut yet. 1 stone in the rag. 1 setter at my fire flexing hands her collar would not let her use. The token came with the dawn, and after that it came every dawn. A flat brass tab on a cord left on Fu's threshold, with 1 fresh notch cut in it. 29 the first morning. Nobody saw who left it. Nobody needed to. Yanru had promised 30 days, and Yanru delivers what he promises, 1 notch at a time. Han Xiao picked it up, read it like a bill, and hung it on the shed nail without a word. It became our calendar and our alarm bell, and it never once missed a morning. Gaomu answered the water board that same week, and he answered it his way. No fists. Fists were the old tariff. He had learned at the tally board that hitting me was expensive, so he stopped hitting me and started drying out everyone who stood near me. He runs the well, and the well runs on his memory. A man was seen laughing with the washrat, and that man's bucket found itself last in line, then behind the carters, then somehow afternoon when the flow runs thin as spit. A woman sold me a turnip. Her boy waited 3 hours the next day and went home damp-bucketed. Nothing you could point at. Everything everyone could see. Half the wash sided with him inside a week, and I want to be fair about why. He fed their children first when the flow ran short. He remembered their names. His shade was real shade, and the man he was drying out slept on stones and made diamonds nobody could explain. My 4 chalk names still stood on the board because he would not eat his own word in public. He just made the names expensive. That is how sieges work down here. Nobody storms anything. They price your friendships until you cannot afford one. Su Yin lost 2 patients over it. Families that stopped sending for her because her shadow smelled of mine. She reported it flatly, added it to no ledger, and kept walking her rounds. Han Chao, from her corner, priced my company for the household at 4 buckets a day, and rising, which was accurate, which was the point of saying it. The old answer to a man like Gao Mu is to break him, and I had 2 women at my fire arguing versions of that. The collector's answer is different. You do not fight a man for his lever. You find out what the lever is bolted to, and you unbolt the wall. His lever was 1 well. 1. In a district built on old diggings over a mountain that has been chewed hollow for 2 centuries, the entire lower tier drank from a single sanctioned hole because nobody living remembered where the water used to run. Nobody living, except the man everyone counted as furniture. Lao Kui has washed ore for 30 years. Before that he dug, back when the lower galleries still ran wet crews. His spine is a question mark. His lungs are a gravel pit, and he sleeps in the open because his corner went to younger backs years ago. The wash steps over him. I had stepped over him myself, twice, and I remember both times now with a specific shame. The panel had a line for him, and the line was one word: witness. I sat down next to him with half my water ration and asked one question, not about water, about digging. Where did the old crews drink, grandfather, before the house sank the sanctioned well? He looked at me a long time with eyes the color of wash water. Then he said, nobody has called me grandfather since the third gallery closed. And he talked for 2 hours and I did not interrupt once, because the map coming out of him was worth more than the mine above it. There was a flooded crosscut, he said. East heading, below the second heap, sealed when he was 40 because the house would not pay for timbering wet rock. Good water, cold water, live water. 30 paces of bad roof between the tailings gap and the pool, and every pace of it remembered in a body that could no longer walk 10. I asked his price, because everything has one and pretending otherwise insults the seller. He was quiet for a while, then he said, I have washed stone for 30 years and I will die in a ditch like a snapped shovel. Promise me the one thing. Not in the ditch. A floor, a wall, somebody who knows my name in the room. That is the whole invoice, boy. I said it plainly, because he had earned plain. I cannot promise you a good death, grandfather. I can promise you will not meet it in a ditch and that the name in the room will be right. He nodded once, spat in his palm, and gave me 30 years of the mountain's insides across a handshake. Bai Yue heard the plan that night and pronounced sentence. Opening a sealed horizon is mine crime, she said. Not rumor crime, the kind with a stated punishment, Han Qiao said. Then we sell access quietly, cup by cup, and the punishment stays theoretical while the margin does not. Su Yin said one word, everyone. Open it for everyone or do not open it. 3 systems, 1 table, and boss asleep on the middle of it. I ruled for everyone, and not from nobility, from arithmetic. A secret well is a thing Gao Mu can find and seize. A public well, drunk by 400 throats on the first morning, is a fact. You cannot arrest a fact. You can only join it. We went down at night, through the tailings gap, Lao Kui's map in my head and Fu's tools on my back. The crosscut was where he said, and the roof was as bad as he said, and the water beyond it was better than he said. Cold, clear, moving. Live water, singing to itself in the dark under a mountain that had supposedly been sucked dry. It tasted like money coming home. The bad 30 paces nearly buried us twice. On the second groan of the roof, Fu unwrapped what we had argued about for 2 days and seated it fast, swearing, one-handed. Our last stone from the ditch, set in an iron wedge, driven into the keystone crack. A holdstone, Fu had called it, reading it against the lamp. Grief that got answered. It holds what swore to hold. Gray, heavier than it billed. And the roof took the wedge like a spine takes a good word, and 30 paces of dead rock stood up straight and held, and we walked out of the mountain with wet boots and shaking hands. I will not pretend I understood my own inventory yet. What I had seen, I understood. 1 stone, seated right, had just done what the house would not pay timber for. The difference between a rock and a miracle is a setter and a fire, and I had neither of my own, and I had never wanted anything so much in either life. The water came up the next morning, in daylight, with the lane watching, because that was the entire strategy. Witnesses are cheaper than walls. We cut the channel through to the old trough line, Lao Kui directing from a plank seat like a general with gravel lungs, and the first cold sheet of it came down the stone gutter into the wash yard, and the wash went silent, and then went the other thing. 400 people drank free water by noon. Su Yin ran the line. No lists, no worth, first come first cupped. Aunt Ma arrived mid-morning with a jug and her allegiance in transit, loudly blessing whoever had found it, whoever he might be, the dear boy. And Gao Mu's queue died where it stood. Not beaten, not stormed. Abandoned. By dusk, the sanctioned well served 11 people, and 9 were housemen, and Gao Mu stood at his empty board with his chalk in his hand, a king of a line nobody stood in. Nobody said a word to him. That was the terrible part, and I designed it, and I watched it work, and I am not sorry, and I noted what it felt like to not be sorry. It felt like the old office. He came at the water sideways 2 days later, of course. Men found the trough fouled with tailings one dawn. Spite, dumped for the lane to find. It cost us a morning of digging and cost him more, because the wash saw who fouled and who dug. When your lever breaks, grabbing at the new one in daylight just teaches the crowd whose hands are whose. Then, he did what actual predators do when the herd thickens. He picked off the smallest one at the edge, where the noise is cheapest. Little Ba, who had stood in the old queue last every day of his life, and who was, that week, the loudest boy in the district about the new water. They caught him alone behind the smoke sheds. 3 of Gao Mu's men, 1 boy, arithmetic as old as men. They did not break bones, they were professional. They emptied his carrier bag into the mud, stepped on his hands, and told him whose water a rat drinks. Su had him on her table an hour later, hands wrapped, face gray with fury, his and hers both. And I sat with him while she worked, and the panel opened on its own, and under his name where a lack should be, it wrote something I had not seen before. Nothing missing, just a line, faint, like a held breath. I asked him, not the panel, what he wanted. Not revenge, he said, through a fat lip, and surprised me. Revenge is one meal, he said. I want to matter enough that hitting me costs something. Nobody hits Yanru's runners. Nobody spills the house's bag. Make me that, and I will build you eyes on every corner of this city. 14 years old. I have hired grown men with half his clarity for triple his wage. So I did it in the open, which is the only place anything is real here. Next morning, at the new trough, in front of the water line, I named him. This is Ba. He runs my errands, he carries my word, he collects what I am owed. His bag is my bag, his hands are my hands. Whoever prices them, prices me, and I collect slow, but I collect entire. The wash heard it, Gao Mu's men heard it, and Ba stood there with his wrapped hands and his chin up, 13 kinds of pride fighting 3 kinds of tears, and lost the fight in front of everyone and did not care. The tear came off him heavy, in the waterline, with witnesses. It rang on the trough stone, and 400 people watched me pick up a diamond fallen out of a beggar boy's face, and the 2 crowds from Su Yin's healing became one crowd, one thought. It is true. All of it. The wash rat makes stones. Fu read the stone that evening with his lamp and his thumb and his 40 years, and his voice changed registers. A 3, he said. Solid, deep, clean through. Boy, do you know what a 3 opens? I said, tell me. He said, a working collar, not a master's piece, not house oath iron, but a working man's collar. A 3 unlocks if the breed matches and the hands are right. Every head at the fire turned to Bai Yue, whose hands are the rightest in the city, and whose collar stops them at the 3rd move, every time, forever. And Fu put the stone down and killed the celebration with one sentence, because that is his gift. I said nothing I have not proved, he said. That is not pride. It is craft law. A stone this deep-seated wrong does not fizzle, it shatters what it sits in. My proof gear went to the house with my arm. No proof, no setting. Find me a proving fire, or find better hands than mine. The circle again. But smaller now, and I could see all of it, and everything it still needed lived in one place. A proving fire and right hands. The hands sat at my fire wearing a collar. The collar wanted a 3. The 3 wanted proof. Proof wanted fire, and fire in this city has exactly one landlord. The bill for the water came due on my body, as bills here do, and it goes on the page because it does not leave the page for years. Lao Kui's 30 years arrived that same night. His spines bend, his lungs gravel. I woke coughing wet stone dust I had never breathed, folded like a man twice my age, and stayed folded. Su Yin read me in one pass, said, his where? Your ledger? How long? I said, until his promise is kept, near as I can price it. She looked at Lao Kui asleep by the trough head, kept warm and fed and finally necessary, and she said, then stand slower and lift nothing, because that debt has years on it. She was right. It held for seasons, and every morning of it, I unfolded one joint at a time and remembered what water costs. Count the week anyway, because the week deserves it. A dead crosscut opened and 400 throats drinking free. A queue that owned this district, dead without one blow struck. A boy turned from target into institution, and the first stone in Sichuan everybody watched being born. A 3, said out loud by a setter, with a purpose sized exactly to the collar on the best hands in the city, against it. My back bent on borrowed years, wet lungs, 26 notches on a brass tab, and counting down. A carter owed work I still could not deliver, and an overseer with nothing left but grudge, which is when small men are most expensive. Fu summed the road ahead at the fire around his pipe in trade grammar. You need a proving fire, boy, and there is a woman 1 tier up who runs one outside the house's yards because collars must be fitted somewhere, and even Kong cannot own the fitting shed. Ernyang. She seats nothing she has not proved, and she proves anything for a price, and she asks no questions except the price. 26 days. A 3 in my pocket, right hands at my fire, and one honest furnace in the whole city standing between the two. For the first time since the ditch, the circle had a door in it, and the door had a keeper, and keepers are my trade. 26 notches on the brass tab, and, a first since the ditch, I owned everything a plan needed except the permission to run it. A 3 in my rag, the best hands in the city at my fire, and one honest furnace standing between them, with a keeper whose whole trade was not asking questions. Ernyang fits collars. She also unfits them. Somebody in this city has to, because collars are legal hardware, and hardware needs a licensed bench. Her shed sits on the middle tier between a dyer and a coffin maker. which the street finds funny for reasons the street will explain to you at length. She has a furnace with a house seal, a wall of tools worn to her handprint, and a price list she recites like scripture. She serves the house. She serves the house's victims. She sees no difference. And if you point the difference out, she agrees with you warmly and quotes the price again. Fu briefed me for the visit like a man loading a crossbow. Do not charm her, she has been charmed by professionals. Do not cry, she keeps a stool for criers and it costs extra time. Bring the exact stone, state the exact job, and have the fee in your hand before your mouth opens. She is the only door left. Do not scratch it. The job I brought her was the most legal thing I had done since arriving. A collar release, her bread work. Bai Yue walked beside me through the middle tier with her hood back, because hiding, she said, is for people who did something. I put it on the bench in plain words. 1 working collar, release, clean method. The stone is mine, a 3, breed matched. Read it, prove it, seed it, do your work. The fee is this. And I set Fu's crooked bone splinter next to the 3, the little men that had closed an infected arm in front of 200 witnesses. Nyang picked up the 3 first. She read it as Fu had, lamp and thumb, but faster, and something moved across her face that she filed away before it could become an expression. Then she read the splinter, and the something came back and stayed a heartbeat longer. A 3. Clean through, she said. Breed right for a limb restraint. And a working mend in a setting done by a drunk badger, which I will take as payment because of what is inside it, not what is around it. Sit the lady on the stool. Payment first. She bit the splinter gently, like a coin, and put it in her apron. The pocket sagged with the morning's takings, and the little mend went in on top like interest on a good loan. Then she named the rest of her price, which was silence purchased in advance. Whatever I see today I saw on a Tuesday, she said. I see collars all week. I remember none of them. That courtesy runs both directions and costs nothing extra, and it is the most expensive thing in the shop. Understood. Understood. She proved the 3 in her furnace with the door cracked, watching the light through it the way Kong had, and I watched 40 years of craft do in 1 hour what I could not buy anywhere else in Sichuan for any money. The stone held its clarity in the heat. Whatever test lives in that fire, my 3 passed it. Then she seated it in the release yoke, set the yoke to the collar at Bai Yue's throat, and asked the question her license requires. This release is purchased by whom, for whom, and does the wearer consent? I said my name plainly. Bai Yue said hers. The shed went quiet as rooms go quiet around a scale. The collar opened like a jaw unclenching. No flash, no thunder, a click, a breath, and a ring of metal lying on a bench like something shed. The 3 went dull as it worked, grayed and crumbled to sand in the yoke. Spent entire. 1 life's worth of stone for 1 throat's worth of freedom, and I would sign that trade again every day of the week. Bai Yi did not thank anyone. I had been warned by then, and I watched instead for what she would do, because doing is her entire language. She stood very still for a moment, working her fingers. First motion, second, third, and no stop. Fourth, fifth, her whole hand opening and closing like a gate too long rusted. And her face did not move at all while her eyes did everything a face usually does. Then she looked around the shed once, walked to Nyang's bench, took up a graver without asking. She pulled my payment back out of the apron region of the world by pure moral force. This setting is a crime, she announced, to the room, to the city, possibly to history. I will not have it leave a bench I stood next to, and she reset Fu's splinter there at a stranger's station with borrowed tools in about the time it takes to eat a modest lunch. I do not have the craft words yet to tell you properly what changed. The stone did not change. Everything around it agreed to hold it differently. The crooked went out of it, and something else went into it. And when she set it down, the little bone thing looked less like a repair and more like an argument. Even I could see the argument. Nyang looked at the reworked piece for a long time. Then she looked at Bai Yue's hands. Only her hands. The way I look at ledgers. She said, I fit the collar that stopped these 2 years ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember none of them. And she wrapped the splinter like something worth wrapping. The proof of the work came free, as street proof does. A carter at the shed door, waiting on a buckle, had watched the whole resetting with the open mouth of a man at theater. Nyang tested the old work against the new the honest way, strain against strain, in front of him and the queue behind him. Fu's seat slipped under load, as Bai Yue had said it would a month early. Her seat held, and the queue watched a wash-tier nobody's stone outhold housework. By evening, the middle tier had a new story and my name was in it again. I never once paid for advertising in that city. The city insisted. We came home to a fire with 1 more free throat around it and 1 fewer secret, and I will give the bad part now, because it walked in the door with us. Han Qiao was sitting by the shed wall, flipping the brass tab in her fingers. She looked at Bai Yue's bare neck for exactly 1 breath. Then she said, to me, in her flattest voice, good work. Fast, quiet, Well priced, I would have routed you past the dye wards. The house watches that lane on collar days. But nobody asked the courier. I started to say the reasons, and she put the tab on the ground between us, gently, which was worse than throwing it. I know the reasons, she said. I can recite the reasons. The collar makes me a hole, so the household routes around the hole. Sound engineering. Now tell me which morning you are going to notice that you built the hole into a person. She walked her watch on the roofline that night and did not come down for supper. And boss carried a heel of bread up to her, uninvited, the fat traitor, and she let him stay. Second turn of the crack. I heard it move. I had no repair for it, and the honest ledger says I did not look very hard for one because the next morning ate everything. Kong understood in a day. I had modeled a week, a day. He did not come for me. He did not send men, and nothing broke anywhere. What happened was quieter and complete. Boz Runner reached me at noon with the news. Master Kong was at Nyang's shed at first bell, with a purse and 2 house clerks. Not shouting, buying. He bought the shed. The furnace, the seal, the wall of tools with her handprint worn into them, the license, the stool for criers. All of it, at a price Boz Boy described with religious awe. And he hired Nyang to keep standing in it, at wages, doing what she does, for the house, under his name. Same shed, same tools, same fees, and every copper now flowed through a ledger with his seal at the bottom. No threat anywhere in it. That is what makes the man frightening. He found the one door I could use and did not lock it. He purchased the wall it hung in. Everything legal, everything generous, everything final. Nyang serves whoever owns the bench, and now the bench had one owner and I was not him. I went anyway that evening to hear it from her because second-hand endings are how fools do their books. The shed smelled the same. New lock plate on the door, house pattern, still bright from the file. She met me at the counter with real warmth and no apology, which from her is the same thing as honesty. "It is work," she said. "It was work when I opened your lady's collar. It is work now that the door answers to Master Kong. He asked me one question when he paid. Only one, whether the strange stone had proved clean in my fire. I told him the truth, because he owns the fire now, and my memory of Tuesdays is his stock in trade along with the tongs. So he knows," I said. She nodded, sympathetic as a nurse at a deathbed. "He knows your 3 proved clean," she said. "He is a mastersmith holding a fact that does not fit his shelf. If I were you, I would be more worried than you look." Then she gave me back a copper I had overpaid a month in advance, because her books balance even at funerals. I stood in the street outside the only honest furnace in Sichuan and did the day's sums against its shut door. Buy Yue free, hands live, worth an army. The path proved, start to finish. Read, prove, seat, release. It works. I watched it work, and the path closed behind us like water behind a boat. Every stone from here forward needed a fire, and the fires now had one landlord. And the landlord had spent an afternoon and a purse to say one sentence to me across the whole city. "I see you." Bai Ye's answer to the closed door was to try to walk through it. "Take me to Kong," she said at the fire, flexing her new hands. "Craftsman to craftsman. I will put my work next to any bench in his yards and let the benches vote. He respects work. He will deal." She was 2 days out of a collar the house put on her for refusing bad stone, offering to walk back into the house's reach on the strength of being right. I said so. She said, "Being right is the only coin I have ever banked, and it has never once devalued." The frightening part is that in her ledger that statement is simply true. Hankow, from the roof edge, voted the other way without being asked. "Go dark," she said. "A month. Let the tab run down, sell nothing, seat nothing. Be boring." Men like Kong lose interest in boring. I have outweighted better hunters than a smith. Also a true statement, from her ledger. And I sat between the two of them doing what I do now, which is choosing which right person to disappoint first. I chose both. No Kong, no burrow. 22 notches left on the tab did not permit a month of boring, and the front door of the house did not permit a mastersmith summit. We needed a third fire, and there were none, so we would need to grow one, and that is next quarter's ledger, not this page's. The week closed with a small wrong thing, as weeks here do. Ba, restocking Fu's bench from the scrap rows, came home with a pouch of trade oddments, and in the pouch was a stone, mine-cut, house packet, bought for nothing off a scrap man because it had come out of a broken hilt. It looked like a diamond as a drowned man looks like a swimmer. Bai Yue turned it in the firelight and her new hands went still. "Cloudy at the heart," she said, "and it flexes. Stone does not flex. This one gives under the thumb like bad ice." She passed it to Fu, and Fu looked at it one-eyed for a long moment, and then put it down and wiped his thumb on his coat, twice. Neither of them said a word after that, which was loud. Fu, who lost his arm to shattered stone, silent as a filled grave. Bai Yue, who audits everything, declining to audit. The wrong little stone sat by our fire, giving off no light, and everyone found a reason to sleep facing away from it. Count the ledger where the month ends. One collar off, the first of three, done clean, in daylight, by the law's own bench. One splinter reworked into an argument. One path proved entire, and one path bought shut, both by the same quiet old man. 22 notches, 11 tails still waiting on a carter's brother I could not yet help. Two women right in opposite directions, one crack widening on a roofline, and on the scrap heap of the richest house in the world, stones that flex like bad ice. Nobody who knows stone will talk about them. I filed it all where I file things, and the last entry kept me awake. Kong knew my stone had proved clean. A man who cannot abide a fact that does not fit his shelf does not burn the fact. He builds a new shelf. I fell asleep trying to price what that shelf would cost me and got it wrong by half, which by my standards that season was close. I spent that week hunting fire the way other men hunt work, and the city kept showing me its teeth. 22 notches became 19. Every yard with a chimney had heard a quiet sentence with my name in it. The trail of doors ran out on the middle tier, and what waited at the end of the trail was not a furnace. One thing went right first, and I log it because it fed us and because of the buckle. Sister Chin's scullery girl stood accused of stealing spoons, publicly, tearfully, wrongly. I read the room over one bowl of soup, found the true pattern in about the time soup takes. I handed Chin her actual thief, a delivery man with a system. The girl's shame came off her in front of the whole eating house, and her tear rang on the table. I was past being surprised. A two, Fu judged it, breed veil. Shame that got lifted. He seated it in a cheap belt buckle over his little brazier, grumbling that ones and twos are all the fire he owns now. And the words proving furnace occurred in his grumble 11 times. I wore the buckle out of habit more than plan. 3 days later, it earned its year's keep in one afternoon, and I stopped wearing anything out of habit. It happened on Court Street, in the middle of the day, with half the tier watching. A porter named House Xue was crossing with a load of dye jars. A big quiet man, collared young over a father's debt, 20 years of carrying other men's weight without dropping any of it. I knew his face the way you know furniture on a street you use. Everybody did. The sound came first. A crack, thin and wrong, like ice deciding. His collar, the gray working iron the house fits by the thousand, split at the throat seam with nobody touching it, and the pieces did not fall. They went in. I watched it, and I will spare you most of it, though the record needs this much. The shards of a broken binding stone do not drop like glass. They crawl. They went into him like filings to a magnet. And House Xue stood very still in the middle of Court Street with his jars on his shoulder. Then he was somewhere else behind his own face. The jars went through a shop front. The shop's doorpost, oak with an iron strap, came off its hinge in his hand like a stalk of grass. A man who had never once raised his voice in 20 years took the street apart in silence. He moved with a strength his body had no license for. His eyes were the worst part, because they kept coming back. That is the thing nobody tells you about the salt mad. It is not a monster arriving. It is a man flickering. All that clean carrying and the iron at his throat had been keeping a second set of books against him. 3 breaths of nothing behind the eyes, then 1 breath of House Xue, fully himself, seeing what his hands were doing. And the sound he made in those windows was not a roar. It was an apology. The street did what streets do. Screamed, emptied, watched from corners, and 2 people ran the wrong way, and I am proud past telling that both of them ate at my fire. Suyin went straight in, under the swinging beam, and planted herself in his flicker, talking, low and even, a bone-setter's voice. House Xue, it is the yard woman. Put the wood down, brother. Your shoulder is out. Let me see the shoulder. The shoulder was beside the point. Being tended is the one grammar a carrier's body remembers when the rest is gone, and I did the only useful thing I have ever done in a fight. I got close enough to press the buckle into his spare hand, and I thought about shame, lifted, and the veil went through him like dusk. He did not calm. Veil does not calm. He faded. The rage stayed with no address left, the street stopped being full of targets, and in the gray of it, Suyin got his hand. And we walked him, flickering, apologizing, hidden in plain sight, off Court Street and down the cut to her cellar. We passed 2 housemen who looked straight at us and saw a sick porter and his family. The buckle crumbled at the cellar door. A 2, spent entire, cheap at 1,000 times the price. What was left in the cellar when the veil wore off was a man tied to a cot with cart rope at his own request. He was in his own lucid minute, asking his own question. He asked it of Suyin, not me. He said, "How much of me is left, yard woman? Tell it straight. You have never once lied on this tier." And she told it straight, because she is who she is. Less each hour, brother. The shards walk inward. Nobody has ever walked them back. Then he asked the other thing, still in that reasonable carrier's voice, and the cellar got very quiet. "While it is still me asking," he said, "do it while it is still me asking. After, it will not be me, and after that, it will not be asking." Suyin looked at him a long time, and then she looked at me, and I understood I was not being consulted. I was being informed. She said, he has the right. It is his self and it is leaving, and he is asking while he holds the door. I have herbs that make it sleep, then make it stop. It is a kindness I know how to do properly. I said no. I want the record to show everything that was in that no, because some of it does not flatter me. Mercy was in it somewhere. The collector was in it too, louder. A man whose collar shattered inward was a fact. The only walking, breathing proof in the city that House Xue fails. Dead, he was grief. Alive, he was evidence, and I needed evidence, and I dressed the need in Mercy's coat and said no. Su Yin heard every layer of it. That is her craft, reading what is under the skin. She did not argue twice. One argument, set plain as a bone, and then she let the silence do the pressing for her. She wound the rope, set the watch schedule, and said one sentence as she passed me, without heat, which made it worse. You said no for the ledger, not for him. I will remember which. She was not wrong by a copper. File it with the other entries I do not like reading. Bai Yue never looked at Kang Shi. She looked at what came out of him. 2 shards had fallen at the door when the veil crumbled, too far from flesh to crawl. She took them up with tongs, wrapped them, and sat with them at the lamp like a magistrate with a confession. Mine stone, she said at last. Fresh cut, this year's packet. I know the house marks as I know my own stitches, and it is wrong the same way the scrap stone was wrong. Cloudy at the heart. It flexes before it fails. Real stone shears clean. This bends, then shatters. Then the shards behave like they are still owed something. She laid the flexing scrap from Ba's pouch beside the collar shards, and her 2 exhibits agreed with each other. And the agreement said something enormous and unspeakable. The house was fitting the city's throats with stone that fails inward. I took the question to the one man at our fire who had lost an arm to shattered stone, and he was already standing at the shed door with his back to us, and his silence had changed weight. I asked him plainly, "Phew, you have seen this before." He did not turn around. He said, "I have seen night come before too, and I do not stand around describing it." Then, after a long time, quieter. "Leave it, boy. There are questions where knowing the answer is the injury." This one took my arm. "It is not taking my evenings, too." And he walked to his bench and picked up a file, and the file shook. The house answered Cord Street the next day, at the speed of an institution that has answered before. A crier stood at the top of the street at noon and read it out. An isolated misfortune. A porter driven mad by hidden illness. The house grieves with the family, commends the swift response of bystanders. It reminds the tears that binding stone, true tear stone, does not fail. Anyone repeating malicious rumor to the contrary would be speaking against the house's proof. And the house's proof is 40 years of Master Kong's fire. I stood in that crowd and heard the trap close on its own maker. And for one cold moment I forgot to be afraid and just admired it. Because I had a stone that had passed Master Kong's proof. Clean through, said by Nyang, reported to Kong himself. And the house had just staked its public word on a simple claim. True stone does not fail. Every shard in Bai Yue's wrapping was house stone that had failed. Their defense and their crime could not both be true, and they had published the defense with a crier. An official story that loud is not a wall. It is a confession with the dates left blank. My old trade ran on documents like that. Yan Ru came to the family the day after, and I made sure to be nearby, because watching him work had become my education. He came with the scale and 2 porters' wages of silver. He weighed out the house's liability for a mad porter's damages to the copper in front of the Widow Lane. Then he paid it into Kangshi's wife's hands with a bow the width of a coin, not 1 coin more. She stood there with her exact silver and her inexact grief, and he was gone before her mouth found any of its words. The house's arithmetic, worn as a face. I noted once more that I was studying him as apprentices study masters, and I noted what that said about me, and filed it deep. The count of that week does not balance, and I will not pretend it does. A man is tied to a cot under Su Yin's floor, leaving himself an hour at a time. My ledger and her rope work keep him alive. And his wife thinks him dead because the safest gift I could send her was grief. Su Yin tends him twice a day and does not say the sentence again. She does not need to. It is in the cellar with us every visit. Against that, knowledge. The mine is a lie. The house knows, or the house is terrified of knowing, which behaves the same. Their stone bends, shatters, crawls. Mine holds. Fu knows why, and the knowing took his arm and his voice. And the only laboratory that could prove any of it to the city sits behind a bright new house lock with my name on a list beside it. Knowledge without proof is rumor, and rumor against a crier is a hanging offense with extra steps. To make it proof, I needed what I had needed all season, and louder now. Fire of my own, walls of my own, and coin enough that the next crier worked for me. 19 notches. No stones in the rag. A city that believed me a mine thief. A mastersmith holding a fact that did not fit his shelf. And under my feet, in a cellar, evidence that flickered and apologized and asked to die. Bob brought the week's last report at the fire, unpaid gossip, delivered around a mouthful of Chin's bread. A woman had been asking after me by name at the caravan yard. Loud, he said. Rich, loud. Laughs like a cart on stairs. Eats with her hands, made 2 house clerks move benches. Asked what the stone man drinks and whether he has a price. Everyone at the fire looked at me. I looked at the fire. In my old life, when you are drowning in a documented fraud and a loud, rich stranger starts asking your price, you have exactly 2 possibilities, and both of them arrive smiling. 19 days on the tab. I told Ba to find out everything about her before she found me. He was already gone. The bread stayed exactly where his hand had been, which for Ba is the same as a signed receipt that the matter is serious. Ba's report on the loud woman ran 4 days and read like a weather warning. Madam Wrong. Head of the wrong trading house, caravans on 3 roads, warehouses on 2 tiers, eats with her hands, fired a steward for boring her. Currently asking half the middle tier what the stone man drinks and eats. Sister Chin added the only line that mattered, over soup, unpaid. The wrong woman hates House Xue the way sailors hate rocks, she said, not morally, professionally. They sank 2 of her ventures with collar law. She has been shopping for a crowbar all year, and dear, the way she says your name, you are the crowbar. She did not summon me. I will give her that. She came to the wash herself, in silk the color of a bruise, stepped over the tailings like a woman who owns worse floors, sat at our fire uninvited, and opened with the worst sentence in commerce. I know what you are, stone man, she said. Sit. Eat. I brought the food because looking at your household, if I waited for hospitality, we would all starve before the flattery even started. She had brought a hamper, an actual hamper, with a duck in it. Boss materialized out of the tailings dark before the lid was fully off and sat on her foot, blind face aimed at the duck with the moral authority of a tax office. She fed him first. It was the smartest opening move our household had ever received. Then she laid out the offer, loud, greasy-fingered, and cleaner than any contract I ever collected on in my old life. A yard on the middle tier, hers. A furnace in it, cold but sound, hers. Coal by the cart, guards on the gate, and her name over the door, which in this city is a wall thicker than the wall. In exchange, product. My stones, seated by my people, sold through her hands at her margins. And one more thing, she said, and here is the meat, so chew slowly. The collars, she said. Your bonesetter's binding transfers from House Xue to House Wrong, along with your debt, all 43 taels of it. The courier's bond the house kept. The gray man's scale goes home empty. His deep lists lose your women's names because my people are not his to list. That tab on your wall stops arriving, stone man. I am buying your clock. Understand what she was offering. In plain terms, the quiet floor deadline, gone. Yanru's rights, gone. Fire, walls, coal, protection, all in one loud package with duck grease on it. And the price, in the same plain terms. Every person I had pulled up out of the mud would be pulled up into her hand, not freed. Re-owned by a friendlier owner, a sentence with rot in the middle, and I have spent 2 lives learning that smell. Bayou took me apart first that night, in front of everyone, because she does not believe in private mathematics. You are trading a wolf for a well-fed wolf, she said. Her collar law is the same law. Her margins will decide what we make and who we make it for, and the day her ledger says the poor tiers pay better in salt, we will be making salt. Han Xiao took me apart second, colder, mending harness. She names the price up front because the second price comes later, she said. With women like Wrong, there is always a call on the favor, and it comes on the worst day, priced accordingly. I have carried her freight. Her invoices have grandchildren. They were both right. Put that on the record beside the fact that I agreed anyway. Because here was the other column, and I read it out to them the way Yan Ru would have, item by item. 15 notches left on a tab that ends at the quiet floor, which eats people and returns nobody. 0 fires open to us in the city. 1 man flickering in a cellar as our only evidence, and no way to make more proof without a furnace. We were not choosing between freedom and a leash. We were choosing which decade the leash got us. So I went to her warehouse and I bargained hard for 1 clause, because it was the clause the whole design lived in. The rest I left alone. Any person under your bond, I said, walks free any day they can lay down the sum of their own debt. Stated figure, posted price, no penalty, no renegotiation, no right of refusal on your side. The door has a price on it, but the door stays cut in the wall. Forever. In front of your own captains. Say it. I stood over her table. She looked at me for a long moment with the duck bone still in her hand, and what was behind her eyes was not offense. It was appraisal, and under the appraisal, entertainment. An exit priced in advance, she said. You know what that clause costs me? A worker who can leave is a worker you must keep choosing to keep. She grinned with every tooth she owns. Done, Stone Man. Witnessed and said, I like a man who negotiates for the cage door while standing inside the cage. It suggests plans, and plans are the only entertainment worth funding. We moved into the yard inside the week, and I will allow the page one warm morning, because we had earned it and the winter had not. A real roof, a real wall against the wind, and a stove Han Xiao got roaring with stolen technique, and the first night every one of us slept warm at the same time, which had never once happened. Rong sent a card of quilts with her seal on them, so nobody could rob us of them, which is what passes for tenderness in that woman, and honestly, it passes. Fu walked the cold furnace 3 times like a man courting, laid his one hand on the brick and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, light it, boy. And we lit my first fire, and the old man stood in the glow watching the draw pull clean, and his face did a thing I will not describe because he would hate it described. Bai Yue had the tools sorted by dawn into an order only she understood and would defend with violence. The first work off that fire was hers. Start to finish my stone, her hands, no Fu translating. The stone was an edge out of the moving week, and every stone deserves its line. One of Rong's own porters, a quiet man named Gay, stood accused by her yard chief of pilfering cord. I read the yard in an idle hour, found the cord walking out in the chief's own manifest padding, and put the proof where Rong could not miss it. She sacked the chief at the gate, loudly, and made him carry his own confession to every warehouse on the row. And G, cleared in front of the whole yard after 2 years of sideways looks, cried once with his fists closed. Rage that finally got its justice. The tear rang on the yardstone. An edge, said Bai Yue, reading it. A 3, and angry. Good. She seated it in a short knife over our own fire, at her own bench with her own tools. And what came off that bench made Fu put down his cup. I have no craft eye, so I will tell you what the knife did instead of what it looked like. Set against a collar lock, the practice lock Ernyang sold Fu, it went through the hasp in one draw. No force, no noise, like a decision already made. A blade that cuts what it swore to cut, and Bai Yue had sworn it small and precise. Collar locks. Nothing else. A tool, not a weapon, because she builds arguments, not threats. The morning after the fire was lit, no brass tab lay on any threshold of ours. I stood in the doorway a long breath looking at the empty step, 15 notches and then no notch, and somewhere in a gray office a scale had been packed away mid-count. I felt lighter, and I mistrusted it instantly, which the season had taught me, and the week confirmed. Juiping arrived on the 4th day, because of course he did. The story of the wash rat with a wrong yard had climbed the tiers faster than smoke, and somewhere up there it had landed on the one man whose whole self is made of other people's opinion of him. He came with 6 hired men and the courage of daylight, and they turned over the front yard. Racks down, quenching trough-tipped, a stack of good clay pots to shards. One apprentice's arm opened on a hook. He did not touch the furnace. Even his men knew whose seal was on the gate, and their nerve spent itself on crockery. Clay is cheap. He stood in the wreck he had paid for and looked for me and found me watching from the bench, not rising. Say something, rat, he said. Say one clever thing. I said nothing at all. The pause did my work, as it has done my work in 2 worlds. It builds the other man. Into that pause walked Madame Wrong. What it cost him in the end was worse than any beating in stock. She arrived with her captains, counted the damage out loud, item by item, at market rates, in her cart-on-stairs voice. Then she sent the bill not to him, to his mother, and his mother paid it. Publicly, promptly by steward, with a spoken apology for her son's high spirits, cried at Wrong's gate, where every account is cried. The whole city heard House Xue's lady pay for her boy's tantrum, like a farmer paying for a goat that got into the neighbor's cabbages. Ba reported the aftermath from the upper tiers with relish. Shuiping had been laughed at by name in 3 drinking houses, and the sums had been explained to him by his mother's steward in small words. The rat now stands in wrong ground. Touch him, and every pot you break, your mother pays for at rates the wrong woman sets. You have made him expensive to hate, young lord. You have made hurting him a tax on your own house. An economic reversal, my old office would have called it. The man who beat me for free now pays a fee to want to. I filed the shape of that trick next to the water queue. Levers do not have to be broken. They can be repriced. Now the cost column. Because this ledger does not skip lines, Su Yin was not at the signing, not at the fire lighting, not at the duck. She was in her cellar and her lanes, with a flickering man and a district's worth of winter coughs, and when I brought her the news she listened, hands still working, and said, so now we are owned by a louder voice. Tell me when it changes anything down here. It was not a quarrel. It was worse. It was a woman filing me under weather, and Yan Ru answered Wrong's purchase without one visible motion of anger, in his own grammar, the only way he ever answers. He started buying my people, not the household, the saved, the tallyman's friend who had straightened out after the water board, The dye woman whose boy I had priced medicine for. Two of the 19 names that drank at the new trough that first morning. His clerks came with real offers: work in house yards, dry rooms, debts consolidated at mercy rates, better bread than mine, from cleaner hands than mine, with only one small line about loyalty in the middle of it. The first two went inside a week. I watched them go from the yard gate, and I want it written plainly. They were not wrong to go. He offered them up. I had offered them out. And out is colder. The night the second one left, the edge knife went dark on the bench. Gray, quiet, a knife-shaped stone with nothing in it. G, the porter whose rage had made it, had been offered a house job the same afternoon, and G had taken it, and consent had walked out of my inventory on a stranger's schedule. I sat with the dead knife a long time. My tools, it turned out, were subscriptions. Every stone in my future would stay lit exactly as long as somebody, somewhere, kept choosing me over their next best offer. Yanru had understood my machine before I finished building it, and his answer was not to smash it. It was to outbid it, and the weight came back that same night, both of them at once, as the rule warned and I had never yet felt. 2 rescues, unfixed, rebired. My back, already carrying Lao Kui's 30 years, took the pair of them on top like wet sacks. And for a day and a night I breathed shallow and moved like a man of 80 until somewhere in a house dormitory 2 ledgers settled, and the extra weight let go, and left Lao Kui's familiar mountain where it always was. So count the season's strangest week: a fire of my own, a yard of my own, quilts with a seal on them, and a knife that cut collar locks until it forgot me. The clock stopped. The tab gone. The deep lists empty of our names. A duck, a door with a price on it, and an enemy heir taxed for the privilege of hating me. Against it. 43 tails moved from a scale to a smile. Every person I raise now standing in a market where the house bids against me for their loyalty and pays in bread I cannot match. Suyin filing me under weather. And a new clause in my own rules, learned the hard way, burning quietly under everything. To hold what I build, saving people cannot be the product. Staying saved has to be. And I did not yet know how to sell that, to them or to myself. And the man who was about to teach me what happens when you decide such things for other people was already waiting, 2 parts of a season ahead. In a quarter, I had not walked yet. Wrong summed the week from her cart gate, laughing, with grease on her fingers. You cost me a fortune and a yard chief, stone man, and my enemies pay your damages now. Best entertainment I have bought in years. Try not to die before the second act. I told her I would put it in the contract. She laughed so hard the horses moved. 2 more of the saved took house offers that fortnight. A roofer I had priced out of a bad contract, then the dye woman's eldest, walking up the tier with his bundle and his eyes anywhere but the wrong gate. Yenru was not rating me. He was outbidding me name by name, patient as rot, and my ledger read like a roof in rain. Each leak came priced a coin's width above my column, near enough to pass as drift. Fu had started teaching me to fall that same week, which is not a sentence I expected to write. Every dawn, in the yard, an old one-armed man putting a grown clerk in the dirt by numbers. Falling is the trade, boy, he said. Any fool can swing. The paying skill is landing where you chose to land. I ached everywhere and wrote it down as tuition. But the leak was the thing. Every person who walked was waiting to come home, and proof to the tears that the stone man's people could be bought back. I needed one rescue that could not be reversed. One person fixed so far above the waterline that no house offer could reach them. I went shopping for permanence, and I found Yin Nu. Her line on the panel had stood open for weeks. A laundry woman on the north lane, quick-eyed, one of the few down here who reads. Collared over her husband's debt, and the collar was the cruel kind, keyed to distance. She could not go further from the man than a street's length. Wherever his debt walked, her feet followed, tied to a drowning man by iron law. The panel's line under her name was 2 words. Her own door. I studied her the way I studied files in the old life, which is the confession buried in this chapter, so read it slowly. I watched her roots. I priced her marriage from the outside, the flinch when his voice came over the lane, the way her shoulders sat when his debt men passed. I built her case entire. And I never once put a question to the woman herself, because I had already decided I knew the answer. Asking felt like handing her a burden. Suyin was gone from my table, but not from my street. She caught the shape of what I was building anyway, because her lanes hear everything. She stood in the wrong gate one evening, first visit in weeks, and did not come inside. Ask her, she said. No greeting. Whatever you are designing for the laundry woman, walk to her door, sit down lower than her stool, and ask. I said, asking marks her. If it goes wrong, she is the wife who plotted her own unbinding. Silence protects her. Suyin looked at me as she looks at a wound going bad under a clean bandage. You said that about Han Xiao, she said, and left. Bai Yu quarrels with Suyin about everything from splints to soup. Yet she took her side before I had finished laying out the plan. That should have been my last warning. Because those two agreeing is the city's rarest event. Not on feeling, she said. On procedure. A setter does not recut a piece without the owner's word, even to fix it. Consent is not kindness. It is the license. Without it, the work has no standing, however clean the cut. I heard her. I filed her under caution rather than command. That filing cost more than every stone I ever lost. What I built goes on the page in full, because the craft of it is the horror of it. The husband's debt was the chain. So I went at the husband, the old way. 2 evenings of watching told me what he could not afford to lose. Not her. His standing at the Carter's bench, where he drank on credit against next season. He was 3 cups from being called a debtor out loud in front of men whose opinion was his whole spine. I bought his debt quietly through one of Wrong's clerks. And then I sat down across from him at that bench, ordered his next cup, and laid it out in my old office voice, the quiet one. Your debt has a new holder. The new holder offers full discharge. The price is a severance, spoken at the house counter before witnesses. Release the wife from the household bond. She keeps her name, you keep your bench, the debt dies entire. He asked what happens if he refuses. I let the pause sit, then priced his 3 cups and his bench for him, gently, item by item. I watched him understand that I was not threatening him. I was describing him. He signed with his voice the next morning, as things are signed here, in front of the counter and the street. It worked. That goes on record with the date. The distance caller released at the severance, iron law satisfied. And Yin Nu stood in the north lane a free woman, unchained from a drowning man, holding her own door key. The design was clean, every joint of it held. My old master would have framed it. She came to the wrong yard that evening, and I knew before she spoke that I had built a masterpiece on a rotten survey. You bought his debt, she said. Quiet voice, laundry cracked hands perfectly still. You sat at his bench. You priced my marriage and settled it. Tell me, Stone Man, when you had the whole file open in front of you, was there a page anywhere in it where I asked? I said the thing I had rehearsed, about protection, about deniability, and heard every word arrive exactly as heavy as it was. She nodded along like a woman confirming a bill. Then she told me what the file had not held, that she had stayed those years on purpose. At a cost she had counted better than I count anything. 6 others on that lane wore collars keyed to that same tangle of household debt. Her sister-in-law among them, 2 of them girls. Inside the marriage, hearing his debts recited, working his moods, she had been walking all 6 of them toward a severance that freed the whole knot together. 2 seasons more, she said. I needed 2 seasons. You spent my marriage in a week to buy 1 collar, mine, the one I was using as a tool. The knot closed that same night. The house, reading 1 severance and 6 suddenly unanchored bonds, called the remainder due. It rekeyed the collars to the debt itself. The 6 lost their walking room to a circle around the house counter, her sister-in-law's girls included. The lane blamed the wife who got out. By week's end, her own people crossed the street from her. The door she finally owned opened onto a quarter that would not meet her eyes. Her tear came at the end of it, standing in our yard, and it was the worst sound I have heard money make. It rang on the stones like every other miracle, and I looked at it lying there and could not make my hand go down to it. Bai Yue picked it up with tongs, read it once, and said, flat of 4. Hold, the deepest we have ever held. Congratulations. The panel confirmed the transaction like a clerk stamping papers. Break true, price paid, stone delivered. Nowhere on it, anywhere, a line for what I had actually done. The ledger does not audit righteousness. It weighs breaks and costs, and I had broken her old life truly, and paid truly, and the machine paid out truly. And every party to the trade was worse except the inventory. Word walks. By the 3rd day, the North Lane had its version, and the version had teeth. It went by wash line and doorstep, cheaper than bread and twice as filling. The Stone Man decides. He bought a husband like a sack of meal and spent a wife's years like copper, and got a jewel off her face for it. The sums were wrong and the shape was right, which is the worst kind of true. Ask yourself what your trouble is worth to him, neighbor. Ask what he might fix about you while you sleep. It was fair pricing as rumors go, and I had no counteroffer worth the breath. The line of people at the wrong gate, the small line that formed on quiet mornings, thinned to nothing in a week. Trust is a water table. You do not see it drop. You see the wells go dry. Su Yin came the last evening, and this time she came inside, and that was worse. She looked at the 4 in its wrapping on the bench, and at me for a long time with those reader's eyes. And there was no anger anywhere in her, which frightened me properly. Anger is a door still open. What she had was a diagnosis. I watched you tell a dying man no, because his death was inconvenient to your evidence, she said. I filed it. I watched you root around Hanxiao like a hole in a floor. Filed. Now this. A woman's whole war, spent without asking because asking might have cost you the peace. It is not cruelty, I know that. It is worse. You cannot see the difference between saving people and operating them, and you get better at it every month. I said her name. She put one hand up, not sharp, just final. A bone setter, stopping a patient from moving something broken. I am not leaving because you are wicked, she said. Wicked I can work with. Half my lane is wicked. I am leaving because down there I decide who gets my hands. And here you decide. And yesterday I caught myself asking your leave before treating a man you distrust. Me? Asking leave. That is your gravity, stone man, and I am standing out of it while my spine is still mine. You will call it caution. Down there we call it a collar with better manners. She took her bag, her herbs, and her lists. She walked out of the wrong gate at dusk, back down to the lanes that trust her. Half my sight went with her, because it had always been her sight. I could read what people fear to lose. She could read what they needed to live. I had confused those two skills all season because hers stood close enough to borrow. Bai Yue worked. Han Qiao counted something on her fingers and wrote the number on the inside of her own skull. Fu drank 2 cups and said one sentence at the bottom of the second. The best cut stone in the world, boy, is still a rock if you took it from the wrong ground. Boss put his blind head on my boot, the only party present with no opinion, and even he sighed. Count the fortnight, and count it honestly, because I did all night, and the totals have not changed since. In the strong column, a hold of the 4th grade, wrapped on the bench, and a design that held at every joint. In the other column, a free woman alone in a lane that hates her, 6 collars rekeyed tighter, 2 of them on children, my doing as surely as if I had forged them. I had run the house's own arithmetic in miniature and been paid in the house's own coin. A stone for a person. The exchange rate down there is the same at every counter. None of us would set the 4. Bai Yue said the words for the household in her flattest audit voice. Good stone. Bad ground. It waits until it can be spent on something that unsays some of this. Then she covered it with a cloth. The weight came due on schedule, because it always does. Yinnu's old cold rooms, her hollow lane, the specific loneliness of a woman cut out of her own knot. It moved in the night she stopped being angry at me, which is when abandonments settle, and it stacked on Lao Kui's 30 years like frost on a bent roof. That is the part I keep. I made offers to everyone in this city. The one person who only ever wanted to be asked, I never asked anything. And out past our gate, in the lanes I could no longer read, the city kept moving as it does when your eyes are gone. Somewhere in it, Gao Mu was doing his slow arithmetic about a boy who ran my errands and had no collar and no house and no mother. Somewhere, a gray man weighed loyalty in bread. I knew none of it, because the woman who would have known was walking her rounds a tier below me, and I had priced her out of my own house without ever once making her an offer. The news came at dusk, through one of Ba's own children, a girl of 9 running like the message was on fire. They took Ba. Gao Mu signed him into binding at noon, the collar went on at the house counter, and the intake cart for the deep lists loads tonight. The mechanics of the theft belong on record because it was legal, every joint of it, and legal is the whole horror of this city. Ba is an orphan. Orphans of the wash fall under the care of the yard overseer. Care includes the right to settle an orphan's keep by binding him to service. Gao Mu had been that overseer for 9 years, and never once used the right, because the boy was worthless to him. Then the boy became my hands, my eyes, my voice on 40 corners. He was worth exactly 1 move on a board Gao Mu was losing. A man stripped of his water, and his cue went digging through what was left in his drawer. At the bottom, he found a child and spent him. Su Yin would have known by noon. Su Yin was 2 tiers down, out of my gravity by her own correct decision, and I learned at dusk from a 9-year-old 6 hours late. Every plan that follows was built inside that lateness, and the record should weigh it. The arithmetic stood like this. The intake cart loads at the shaft mouth at moonrise. On it, Ba and one other from the day's bindings. A dock hauler named Tao, a big slab of a man taken for a season's arrears. After moonrise, the deep lists, the place with a schedule and no returns. My clean tools for a working collar were a 4-grade hold wrapped in cloth and forbidden by its own history, and no time to prove it, seed it, or forgive myself for it. And one other thing on the bench. The edge knife, gray and dead since Guy walked. Bai Wei had refused to unmake it. Consent leaves, she said. It also returns. The stone remembers whose rage it was. Keep the door open. I sent a runner to GE. Not an offer, a sentence. The boy who carried your clearing proof to Wrong's gate is on the moonrise cart. He sent nothing back. The knife stayed gray. I wrapped it anyway, because open doors are open doors, and we went to the shaft mouth, all of us that were left. Me, Han Xiao on the high line, Fu with his hammer arm, and Bai Yue carrying the tools of a trade this night was about to insult. The mouth of the mine at night is a throat. Torch rings, tallymen, a cart with a cage bed, and the little crowd that always gathers where other people's misfortune is being loaded. Gao Mu stood in the torchlight with his arms folded, watching his one good move sit in the cage. And the crowd around him was his crowd again for one night, because watchers are what power eats down here. And beside the cart, silk boots on shaft gravel, stood Xue Ping. The two of them had found each other as spite finds spite. Gao Mu had the legal boy. Xue Ping, freshly billed by his own mother, forbidden to break my pots, had discovered a cheaper hobby. The hobby was standing next to my losses and smiling. He had come to watch the rat's little spy ride down the mountain's throat, and he had brought his voice for the occasion. "There he is," he called when I stepped into the torch ring, the stone man himself. "Come to make an offer, rat, offer the mountain. She holds better collateral than you ever will." I did not answer him, because I had one conversation in my pocket, and it was not his. I walked to the cart, to the tallyman, and I made the offer that the law allowed. Substitution of debt, full settlement of the orphan's keep, coin on the board, wrong's name behind it. The tallyman, an honest enough clerk, actually reached for his counting frame, and Gao Mu said, "Refused. Care rights are mine. I do not sell the boy." His eyes were on me all the while, and there was nothing in them but the pleasure of a man holding something I wanted. This was never commerce. This was the water queue, paid back with a child. The legal road ended there at a word, as legal roads down here always end. What remained was the cage, the moonrise, and force. You need to understand what force meant standing in that torch ring. Breaking a collar without its release is done one way, an edge stone through the binding seam, and a broken collar does not open like a released one. It shatters, and the shards make their choice, and the wearer either walks away whole or goes the way Cord Street went. Nobody can price the odds honestly. Fu, pressed, called it 1 chance in 3 of salt and would not meet my eyes while he said it. 1 in 3. I want the number on the page because I chose with it in my hand, and I chose in front of the person whose neck carried the choice. I got close to the cage on the argument of passing the boy bread, and I asked him, quietly, fast, both of us knowing the cart schedule. "Bah, the knife might work and might kill you sideways. 1 in 3 it goes wrong, near as honest men can guess. Or you ride down and I come for you through channels, if channels exist down there. Your neck, your call. Nobody decides you but you." I had learned that sentence at the price of Elaine's trust, and I have never paid better for a sentence. He looked at me through the cage slats, 14 years old, hands still marked from the city's last beating, and he said, "Cut it. If it goes wrong as me. Down there, it goes wrong as nobody. Cut." The knife came up gray in my hand. Then it was not gray. I have thought about that moment more than any stone since. Somewhere up the tier, a porter in a house dormitory, hearing whatever his own evening told him, stopped being against us. "Consent is not loyalty," Bai Yue said later. "It is lighter. It can come back on a breeze." The edge woke like a coal blown on, and I put it through the binding seam of a child's collar in one draw, as a bill goes through a household. The collar rang apart. 3 shards jumped. 2 fell dead on the gravel. The third crawled 2 inches toward his wrist, slowed and stopped, a grain short of skin. It lay there smoking like a small, evil coal. Ba stood up out of the cage hole, patted himself twice, and said, loudly, for the crowd, invoice to follow. His voice broke in the middle. Nobody laughed at that part. What happened next happened fast, and I set it down plainly. Xue Ping, watching his evening's entertainment stand up alive, lost the shape of himself. He grabbed the boy by the collar of his shirt, and the words he was starting were mine. "He is," when I took his wrist. Fu's teaching is falling. Where the weight goes, the man follows. I turned the wrist as I had eaten dirt learning, stepped through. I put the second son of House Xue face down in the shaft gravel. In front of the intake crowd, the tallymen and both torch rings. One move. No blow struck. Silk boots in the air for half a breath. Then a young lord spitting gravel at my feet while I held his arm like a ledger I was done reading. I leaned down and gave him the only sentence I had for him, in the old office voice. "You are standing next to my losses again. Stand somewhere else." The crowd made the sound crowds make when the price of a man drops. He came up white, gravel on his cheek, looked for his men, remembered he had brought none because tonight was meant to be free, and left with his voice arriving late and swearing from a distance. Aunt Ma was already narrating from the 3rd row. By morning, the tale had grown a horse and 2 guards, and I did not correct it. Rumor is the one worker who never asks wages. Then the night collected its bill, because I was not the only man in that ring who had watched a collar break in live. Torchlight keeps clean books, and it had posted the boy's walk to every open ledger on that gravel. Tao, the dock hauler in the cage's other corner, a season's arrears, a wife on the middle tier. He had seen the knife work, and when the tallymen, rattled, moved to roll the cart early, he gripped the slats and called to me. And what he called was, "Me too." Stone man, cut me too. The cart is rolling. Cut me too. There was no time to prove anything, no time to ask twice, and every honest number said stop. One cut in a night was already Fortune's whole allowance, and the cart was moving, and his eyes were the eyes of a man watching the last door close, and I had a knife in my hand that had just worked, and I am writing this part slowly because I owe it slowness. I chose speed. I said the odds at him once, he said cut before the odds finished, and I cut. The collar shattered wrong. I heard the difference before I saw it, a note lower, a crack with mud in it. The shards did not jump. They swarmed, and Tao went the way Kang Xue went, on shaft gravel, under torches, with his wife's name half out of his mouth, and the ring of watchers got to see the other ending, the one Gao Mu had been promising them all season. We held him, Fu and I, until the flickering settled into the long gray. He is not dead. Write that plainly, it is not mercy. He is a big quiet man who comes and goes from himself, roped in Su Yin's second cellar beside Kang Xi, because she took him in with no word to me about doors or gravity, and sent word by a child that visiting hours were for family, and I was not yet family again. Gao Mu stood over the aftermath and did not gloat as small men gloat. He did something worse. He turned to his crowd and he said sadly, like a man vindicated at a funeral, I told you. I told all of you. The rat stones free one and ruin one, and he rolls the bones with your necks. The house binds slow, but the house never yet made a man into that. Count what you saw. And half that crowd nodded. Not fools, not bought. People doing honest arithmetic on what their own eyes had seen, one boy walking, one man flickering, and reaching the reasonable conclusion that the stone man's mercy was a coin toss. His cue was gone, his water was gone, and he walked off that gravel with the only thing that outlasts both, a told you so with witnesses, and me. I walked off it carrying the argument I could not answer. He was not wrong, I had rolled. The bones came up salt, and the neck was not mine. That is the entire verdict, and no appeal has ever changed a word of it. The weight took me at the gate of the yard, both knees, and I let it. Tao's season of arrears, his interrupted life, the specific gray where a man used to be. Mine to carry until it settles, and this one does not settle, because there is nowhere for it to settle into. His wife came the next day, stood in the yard, and asked me one question. Better or worse than the deep lists, stone man? Tell me honest. And I said, I do not know. It was the truest sentence I produced all season, and it helped neither of us. Count the night, because the ledger does not close for grief. Ba, free, whole, loud, wearing his snapped collar stub on a cord like a trophy, already rebuilding his corners with a general's energy. The invoice he submitted for pain, suffering, and cart time ran to 4 items and a daily bread rider, and Han Xiao contested 2 lines out of principle, and the arbitration lasted 3 days and fed the yard better than any play. That is his gift. He turns wreckage into accounting, and accounting into a reason the household laughs again. In my old office, we billed that as restructuring, and clients paid through the teeth for a worse version. Xue Ping, face down in front of 2 torch rings, the 3rd crow that man has eaten off my table, and the first one served by my own hand. Fu, drilling me next dawn, said only, You fell well. From him that is a parade. And on the other page, a man flickering in a cellar because I chose speed over honesty about my own limits. Half the wash convinced by their own eyes that my miracles are dice. Su Yin's door opened to my casualties and shut to me. A knife that answers to a stranger's mood. And Gao Mu, stripped of everything, proved right in public once, which for a populist is water in the desert. The one line that would not stop moving was the last one. The cart rolled at moonrise anyway, with strangers in it. Men whose debts I had not read, sitting where Ba had sat, booked down the shaft at list price. It rolls every new moon, and has for years, and I had stood next to it close enough to smell the cage straw, and I had saved exactly 1 passenger, the one I loved, and let the schedule keep the rest. Tao had gone toward that schedule when the salt took him, Fu said. They all drift toward the shaft, the broken ones, like water finding a drain. Boss stood at the yard gate for 3 nights after, blind face aimed up the mountain, nose working, making a sound I had not heard from him before. A low, steady note, half growl, half grief. Whatever he smelled on the wind off the mine's throat, it was the same thing my ledger smelled. Something at the bottom of this city was eating, on a schedule, and every road I walked kept ending at the door of its dining room. On the 4th night of Boss's vigil at the gate, a salt mad walked up the mountain road, and nobody stopped him. He came bareheaded, boots scuffing the frozen ruts. A stranger from some upper lane, half gone, flickering as he went, one shoulder dropped like a broken yoke. He muttered as he climbed, settling some old account. He passed 2 house guards at the shaft approach. The guard stepped back and let him through, unsurprised, the way men step back from a cart on its route. He walked into the mine's throat as if called, and the dark took him, and the guards resumed their posts. Boss went taut as a rope from nose to tail and made his low note and looked back at me, blind and certain. There it was, laid out plain for anyone patient enough to stand at a gate for 4 nights. The broken do not wander to the mine. They are expected there. The mountain keeps a door open for what it ruins, which means what it ruins has a use, which means somebody is using it. Every road of this season had pointed down that throat. The flexing stones, Fu's silence. The schedule Yanru spoke like a place name. It was time to stop reading the door and open it, and I lacked 2 things: a way past the sealed horizon and the courage to hear what a woman who had worked down there was too tired to keep carrying. Nurse Ping found the courage part for both of us. Boz Corners had turned her up weeks before, a heavy, gray-faced woman on the far middle tier who had nursed on a closed level of the mine for 11 years. Invalided out, she had spent every day since scrubbing her memory with cheap wine and failing. She would not see me twice. The 3rd time she saw me, it was because I stopped asking questions and sat down next to her, silence with my own. I told her about Cord Street, and the cellar, and the man who asked to die while it was still him asking, and she held me a while with eyes like wet slate and said, "You held one, for a night." I held them for 11 years, and then, in a voice as flat as a floor, she told it. Plainly, like a work report. That was the horror of it. It has no drama left in her. It is just her old job. There is a level, she said, below the worked galleries. The quiet floor. It is not a prison and not a mine. It is a dairy, her word. I write it as she said it. The bound are kept in niches, fed adequately, kept warm enough, because product suffers when the body fails. And grief is farmed there, on a rotation, as you rotate crops. News of a death read aloud on schedule, real or invented, to the niche that is due. A child moved to another level on the even days, and returned, and moved again. Word from home doled out and withheld by a calendar. Men whose whole work is knowing which sorrow each soul has left and harvesting it, politely, on time. Tears fall. Stones come. Brittle, cloudy, wrong, because a tear farmed is a tear forced, and forced stone is salt half-born. The mountain has held no true stone for a generation, and the house needs stone as a body needs blood. So the dairy runs, and everyone above it agrees not to know. The ones who cannot manage the not knowing get invalided out with a pension and a thirst. I asked her why she was telling me now, after 11 years of wine. She said, "Because you sat down. Because you held one man for 1 night, and it bent you, and I wanted somebody bent the right way to know before I die. And because of the boy you freed at the cart. My niece washes for the wrong yard. She says you ask people before you spend them. Now. So spend this properly, Stone Man. It is the last thing of value I own." The weight of carrying it came off her as she finished visibly, like a yoke set down at last. Her tear came without her noticing it had come, and rang on the winehouse table. Bai Ye read it that evening. "A veil," she said quietly. "A 3, and old. Shame that got carried too long and finally set down." Then she looked at what her own hands were holding and said, "This stone wants to hide people. It was born from being seen too clearly. It will spend itself gladly on the unseen. It is the only time I have heard her speak of a stone as you speak of a person. We built the descent kit in 1 night, and it was the ugliest work our bench has ever passed. Bai Yue signed it anyway, which tells you what the night was. The veil went into a twist of wire, charcoal blacked with 4 loops run off it on cord. 1 stone, 4 shadows, she said. It will not make us invisible. It will make us uninteresting. Eyes will slide. For a bell, maybe 2, if nobody does anything worth looking at. It is field work, and I am ashamed of it, and it will hold." Fu checked her knots with his one hand and for once in his life offered no insult, which frightened everyone. The door came from Ernyang because every door in my life comes from Ernyang. I went to her house-owned counter in daylight, bought a buckle for cover. Then I asked in the shape of a man asking about weather, how one passes a sealed horizon gate. She looked at me across the counter for a long, level moment. Then she named her price, calmly, as she names all her prices, and her price was not coin. 20 years, she said. I have sent fittings down that shaft on requisition. Yokes sized for necks I never see. Feeding troughs with locks. I sign, I ship, I do not ask. My price is this. When you come back up, you come here, and you tell me what my fittings are for. The truth, whole to my face. I have been not asking for 20 years, and I find I am finished. That is the price. Then she put a gray keystone on the counter between us, house pattern, and went back to her filing as if we had discussed weather after all. I will not stretch the descent. Han Qiao took us in through the old workings off Lao Kui's map, then down the sealed stair where the keystone made the doorpost forget its oath. 1 landing at a time, 4 shadows under 1 tired veil. Boss walked point, blind in a place where eyes were the lesser sense. He set the pace with his nose and we kept it. The mine smells of cold stone and old water. Then, 60 steps down the sealed stair, it begins to smell of soup and lamp oil, and that is the worst smell I have ever smelled because of what it means. Housekeeping. The quiet floor is lit like an evening kitchen. That is what I was least ready for. No screams, no chains rattling, long warm galleries, niche after niche after niche cut into the stone, each with a pallet, a blanket, a bowl. People in the niches, dozens on the first gallery alone, hundreds by the count I built walking. Collared, clean enough, fed enough, sitting or lying, facing the rock or the lamp, in a silence that is not peace. It is the silence after enough tears, which is a sound once you have heard it. Keepers moved on rounds with ladles and lamps, unhurried, gentle even, as good dairymen are gentle. At the gallery's head on a small slate board, the rotation. Which niches were due? What was to be read to them? I stood in the shadow of a woman's shame made wire and charcoal, and I read the house's answer to the empty mountain, written in a tidy steward's hand. Bai Yue stood beside me counting. She counted as she does everything, precisely, whispering the figures into her own collar. 40 niches a gallery, 6 galleries on this level alone. A collection trough under the tier line of each niche, glazed, angled, draining to a covered channel. At the channel's end, a sorting bench, and on the sorting bench, baskets. She made me look at the baskets. Cloudy stones, basket after basket, and perhaps 1 in 8 with any water to its light at all. The mine's whole yield, she breathed. This is the vein. There is no vein. There was never a vein, not in our lifetime. The mountain is people, and standing in that warm, well-run, quiet place, I understood the thing I had come down to prove. And one thing more I had not. The second thing has not once left me since. The keepers harvested grief on a schedule, and the stones came out clouded because the tears were forced. I harvest grief too. I wait for it, I midwife it, I take it fresh at the moment of a true turning, and my stones come out clean. That is the entire difference. Not the machine. The husbandry. The house farms people in niches, and I free-range them in daylight, and both of us walk away holding what fell from their eyes. My gift is this floor. Run kindly. I am the quiet floor with better manners, and every clean stone in my rag was a niche that volunteered. I did not say it down there. I have not fully stopped saying it since. What we did on that floor is the hardest line of this whole account, so here it is without cushioning. Nothing. We freed no one. We could free no one. 6 galleries, hundreds of collars, 1 tired veil with a bell of patience left, and a mountain of house above our heads with 1 stare out. I stood in a place built of exactly the wrong my whole season had been spent against, and I calculated, and the calculation said, witness, count, and leave. So I witnessed, and counted, and turned to leave, and that is when the cost of our one argument came due. Bayuk would not come. Not yet, she breathed. Samples. 2 stones off the sorting bench, 1 shard from a spent yoke, and the count of the 3rd gallery. Or all of this is my word against a crier. Han Xiao had the route timed to the relief of the stair guard and said, now or we are part of the inventory. Both were right. Both had been right the whole way down. I gave Bai Yue the time because her arithmetic was the mission, and Han Xiao's was only our lives, and that sentence is exactly as ugly as the choice was. The delay was 100 breaths. In the middle of it, the relief keeper came early, lamp up into the 3rd gallery, and found nothing to see, because the veil held. But 2 men in the niches saw what the keeper could not. I do not know how. The veil turns eyes, and their eyes turned, and then turned back. Maybe the broken sea sideways. They came up off their pallets at the sight of us. 2 men, 1 young, 1 gray, and the young one said, not loudly, take us, brothers. The words were not mad. That is the thing I carry. The words were entirely sane, the sanest words on that floor. Take us with you. And the floor answered them. Their collars were keyed to the niches, to a perimeter drawn somewhere in the rock. The collars did what collars do. No keeper needed, no cruelty, just hardware. The young man made 3 steps toward us. I will not write what the collar did at the 4th. The gray one stopped at 2 steps knowing, and stood at the very edge of his circle with his hand out, open, not reaching. Just open. The keeper's lamp came swinging back at the noise, and the rotation slate got 2 fresh marks. Then we were on the stair, climbing with the sound behind us. I was counting stairs to keep from counting anything else. 60 steps up, Han Xiao said, without turning. If we had gone when I said, they would be asleep and whole. 10 steps later, Bai Yue said, and if we had gone when you said, this city gets no proof and this floor runs another 40 years. Neither said anything after that. Both sentences were true. I had chosen which truth got the 100 breaths, and the 2 fresh marks on the slate were the price of my choice. No arithmetic anywhere makes that page balance. It does not balance. It is not supposed to. I know that now. We came up into the cold before the graying of the sky. 4 shadows and a spent veil that fell to ash off the wire at the tailings gap, and the mountain stood over us exactly as it always had, with its one lit crown of furnace glow. I looked at it and saw a lid. I kept Nyang's price that same morning before fear could talk me out of it. I stood at her counter and told her, whole, to her face, what her fittings are for. The yokes, the troughs, the locks. She listened without moving all the way through, and when I finished she folded her hands on the counter and studied them, unhurried. Then she said, "Thank you for the trade." And, as I reached the door, quieter, to my back, "The requisition due this month will be filled late. There will be errors in the sizing every month now. It is the only sabotage a careful woman can afford, and she had just enlisted in it, and we both pretended it was shop talk." Bai Yue laid the proof out on our bench that evening, 2 farmed stones cloudy to the heart, 1 yoke shard that flexed, her counts, gallery by gallery, in her setter's memory that loses nothing. Beside them, for the eye's comparison, the wrapped 4, clean as deep water even through cloth. The case entire at last. The mine is a fiction. The house sells forced grief in a stone jacket. The jackets are failing all over the city, and the proof was finally in one place, on one bench, in the hands of people the proof could get killed. The count of that descent, and I will keep it short because some ledgers are wounds. Proof in hand entire for the first time. A witness in Ping, an ally at the fittings counter, a count in Bai Yue's head that no crier can shout down. Against it, 2 marks on a slate that belong to me. A floor of hundreds still humming its warm silence under my feet every step I take in this city. And the sentence I brought up the stair on my own back, which weighs more than the samples. I am the same machine, better run. The right to look at the house across a clean distance died down there in the lamplight. Whatever I build from here, I build as a man who saw his own trade with the manners removed. And the day was not done with us, because days like that are never done. They keep a last item in reserve and bill it at dusk. At dusk, a chair arrived at the wrong gate. Not a messenger. A chair, lacquered, curtained, carried by 4 matched bearers in house colors. A footman unrolled the invitation in speech, because nothing here is written. The lady of House Xue requests the stone man's company, tomorrow, at her table, at his convenience, which means tomorrow. The yard went very quiet. Rong came out, read the chair as sailors read a horizon, and whistled low, 1 note. "Well, stone man," she said, "the mountain has invited the flood to dinner. Wear the good coat, count the exits, and do not, whatever she offers, eat the duck first." Even her jokes had gone quiet at the edges. I stood in the gateway looking at the lacquered chair, one day up out of the dairy with its smell still in my clothes. I did the only sum the evening allowed. She had known about the descent by morning. The invitation was the answer. No guards, no charges, no scale. A table, which meant the next battlefield had a cloth on it, and the woman who ran the lid of this city wanted to negotiate with whatever had gotten under it. 20 steps behind her invitation, somewhere below both of us. 6 warm galleries were being read their evening sorrows, on schedule, and I had a proof on my bench and a name on my ledger the whole city was about to learn whether I could carry. The morning of the dinner, a binding failed on our own lane. A cooper's doorstone, 30 years old, cracked at dawn. The door that had promised to keep out his creditors forgot its oath. And the man stood in the street shaking so hard his teeth clicked. The failures were not news anymore. 4 had come that week across the middle tier alone. This one, though, was ours, our own yard's work, with our own mark on the setting. I could not fix his door. I could fix the shaking. So I sat with him an hour, priced his actual position, which was survivable. Then I drew it for him plainly until the fear let go of his chest. The fear had been the whole illness. His tear came quietly at the end. Bai Yue seated the little mend in a ring band in under an hour, between breakfast and the lacquered chair. I put it on my own hand, a 2. Nothing. It mattered later. The chair carried me up through 3 gates I had only ever seen from below, into the high court of House Xue, and I will tell the estate the way I met it, which was mid-collapse, not ruin. Nothing so honest. As the bearers set me down, though, somewhere behind the inner wall, a crack ran loud as a whip, and servants moved past at the pace that is not running only technically. The great gate's warding stone, the famous one, the fist-sized tier stone that had kept that threshold for 4 generations, had split in the night. The gate stood open and undefended, a sight no living man had met, and the house's own guards did not want to stand near it. Madame Xue received me on a terrace with tea, in the sound of her own house failing. She did not once pretend the sound was something else. That is the first thing to know about her. I had come braced for an enemy and found the only person in Sichuan as tired as me. She is 48 and reads it to the year, which in this city is its own form of wealth. She poured with her own hands, no cupbearer at her elbow, and filled my cup first, to the brim. Behind her, across the courtyard, a crew was roping a cracked lintel while a steward argued in whispers. She followed my eyes and said, plainly, "Yes, it is everywhere. You know why. I know you know. So let us not spend the afternoon lying. It is the one expense I can no longer carry." Then she laid her whole hand on the table, card by card. I wanted on the record that she never once lied to me, that day or any day after. The mine has been done for a generation. What the house sells, it grows below, in a place she called by its name without flinching. The stone is failing, because forced grief makes false stone. Volume makes it worse. She cannot stop the volume, because a city built on binding cannot survive a season without bindings. And you, she said, are a source. The genuine article, walking around loose in my city, making true stone out of kindness at a rate of a pebble a week. Ernyang's fire proved your stone before Kong's eyes. My son eats gravel because of you. I have watched you a season and a half, stone man, and I will tell you what you are. You are the mine. Come back. And I would like to negotiate terms with the mountain. The offer when it came was everything, and I mean that as a measurement, not a figure of speech. I had priced offers all my life. This one weighed. Her furnaces. All of them, the hearthyards themselves, the best fire in the city. Her masters, Kong included, at my direction. Protection written in the only ink this city honors, her spoken word before her assembled captains. The collars of everyone I cared for released gratis that week. Su Yin's, every name on my lists. And volume, she said, is the price. Stones on schedule, 100 a season to start, rising. The dairy wins down as your line comes up. You would be shutting the quiet floor, stone man, by outproducing it. I am offering you the thing you actually want, and I am the only person alive who can sell it to you. And one more clause, thrown in almost as housekeeping. It told me she understood my machine better than anyone I had yet faced. No collar on you ever, she said. I have forbidden it in both my houses. A bound source sours. Your gift under a chain would give me salt, which I have in abundance. Whatever happens between us, your neck stays bare. It is not mercy, it is husbandry, and I know you know the difference, which is why I say it plainly. I sat with the best offer of my life in either life. I want to be honest about the minute that followed, because refusing it was not clean or fast. Every collar off, that week. Real fire, real masters, the dairy wound down. Item by item, it beat everything I could build in 10 years. She watched me price it, patient as winter. Somewhere in the house, another binding let go with a sound like a nut cracking. That sound is what I finally answered. I said, count with me, my lady. 100 a season. A true stone needs a true turning, a real life bent upward, at a real price paid by me. Say I manage 2 a week, working every day, spending myself to the rim. That is not 100. So your schedule eats the difference the only way schedules eat. The turnings get arranged, the grief gets farmed politely. Volunteers first, then the encouraged, then the listed. Inside half a year, your fire is my fire, your rota is my rota, and I am the quiet floor with a nicer entrance. And the stone goes cloudy again, because it always does when the tears are on schedule. You are not offering to close the dairy, my lady. You are offering it a better cow. The terrace was quiet a long moment under the sounds of the house. Then Madame Xue did the thing that made her the most dangerous person I ever sat across. She nodded. Correct, she said, every step. I ran the same figures and reached the same cliff. I hoped you were stupider than your reputation because your version keeps my city alive and mine does not. The offer stands anyway. It will stand next season, and after your first disaster, and after your third, because you will come to it in the end or the city comes apart. And she refilled my cup. We drank to nothing at all, 2 people who agreed on the arithmetic and could not afford each other. Xu Ping attended the whole dinner, seated down the terrace, dressed like a portrait of himself. He understood none of it, and I do not say that as an insult. I watched him track the conversation like a man watching birds argue, mine and volume and husbandry. His mother trading sentences with the washrat who had put him in gravel, no one shouting, no one sentenced. Twice he opened his mouth. Twice her hand moved a finger width on the table and he closed it. By the fruit course he had stopped trying and just sat, magnificent and irrelevant, and I finally understood the man. He was the only person at that table with nothing to sell. I left before the lamps. At the broken gate I stopped and gave the footman the ring off my hand, the morning's little mend. I asked him to carry it to Master Kong with one sentence. You asked once what ground my stone comes from. Here is the answer. Read it however you can. It was a message, not a gift. Kong had held my 3, proved it clean, and said nothing to the city. A man sitting silently on an inconvenient truth deserves one more sample of it. from ground he can watch. Ba's corners reported within days that the old master wore the ring on a cord at his bench. He had been seen twice flexing his scarred hand, the burned one, 40 years of fire in it, without wincing. He told nobody. He mended his own oldest wound in private with the enemy's stone and said not one word. I filed that silence next to Fu's because they were the same silence. Craftsmen who had met a fact too big for their shelf, gone quiet while the shelf strained. Home again, the war council split exactly as the household is built to split, 3 directions, 1 fire. The animal slept on the casting vote. Bayue heard the full offer and said, take it, not from weakness, from craft, real fire, real hands. Kong's yards, she said. Everything we do out here is field botching. In there, I could build things this city has not seen in a century. You are refusing the only workshop that fits the work. And the reason you are refusing is a future you predicted, not one that happened. She was measuring the offer the only way she measures anything, by the bench. Han Kao, back against the post, said, take it and cheat. Sign, empty her yards for a season, learn the fire, free the names, then walk before the volume clause bites. Contracts with the mighty are weather. You wear them while they suit. Her plan was drawn in half a breath, and it was, as always, functional and repulsive precisely where it functioned. And Su Yin was not there, and her absence had a voice. She was 2 tiers down, walking the failure wave with her bag, and everyone at the fire knew what she would have said. She would have asked what happens to the 100 a season. She would have asked it once, quietly, and the offer would have died of the question. We heard her say it without her being in the room, which is when I understood she'd never really left the council. I had just stopped being able to see her. I let the argument run its full length because both women were right inside their own ledgers. Then I told them what I had told the lady and why. And Bai Yue was silent for a long moment and then said, then we need a fire that answers to nobody. And I am tired of waiting to be given one. Remember I said this. I remembered it. It mattered within the season. The last thing Madame Xue had said to me on the terrace, I did not repeat at the fire because I was still pricing it. She said it at the gate, quietly, while the bearers waited. You have counted everything except the one number that decides this, stone man. The failure rate is not steady. It doubles. Whatever you are building down there, build it faster. And she turned back into her cracking house before I could ask what she knew about my speed. The answer began arriving the next morning, and it did not stop for a year. She had said she would not push, and she kept it, the way she kept everything, precisely and to her own advantage. No houseman troubled our lane. Instead, doors opened. A coal contract nobody remembered approving. A middling house inspector reassigned from our quarter. Word passed to Rong that certain tariffs on certain carts would not be collected this season. Help, arriving on schedule from the woman I had refused. Every piece of it made us faster, and every piece of it was a rope paid out to a runner she expected to fall. Han Chao saw it first because acceleration is her mother tongue. She stood over the week's tallies, doubled since the dinner, and said, flat, we are being fattened. Nobody feeds a pig out of friendship. The question is only which market day. And she started, that same night, quietly, running a second set of counts she showed nobody. I saw her do it and said nothing. That silence has its own entry further down this ledger, priced at what it cost. Count the dinner season honestly. The best offer I will ever receive, refused for reasons I would refuse it again. The truth of the entire city, confirmed from the mouth that owns it. An enemy who agrees with my arithmetic, which is the worst kind. A ring on a cord at Kong's bench, working on him in silence. A promise of doubling failure I could not yet feel. And a household running faster every week on a stranger's kindness, toward a wall none of us could see yet. The one person who counted walls was 2 tiers down, walking other people's ruins. The wave was coming. The lady had told me to my face, and I had heard the words and missed the number. Doubling is not growth. Doubling is a countdown wearing growth's coat. And I, of all men, should have opened that coat and looked. The wave found its legs that month, and we ran in front of it. 14 failures a week along the middle tier, then 20. Our yard worked like a pump house in a flood. Fu seating 2s and 3s on rotation, Bai Yue building, Ba's corners routing the worst cases in by triage, me spending myself in careful daily slices and pretending the slices were careful. We were fast, and we were stretched. And stretched is the condition in which a household discovers exactly where it is thin. We were thin in one place. We had built ourselves around a hole shaped like a courier, and the hole had spent a season being told politely in 100 small ways that it was a hole. I want this part told level, without a villain. Because I have had a year to price it, and the villain version does not balance. Han Kao sold us. Those are the plain words. On the dark of the month, she went to Yanru, on her own feet, uncoerced. She traded him the location of the workshop stores, the delivery schedule for the next span, and the hour when the yard stood thinnest. Her price was her own collar, released, plus standing clearance to leave the city. He heard her out, weighed the information the way he weighs everything, and paid in full. Now the list of what she did not sell, because the not selling matters to the record. Not a word about the sellers, the two roped men, or Su Yin's lanes. Not a name from the panel, not a stone's origin, nothing that priced a person. She sold walls, stock, and hours, property information for property freedom. In her ledger it was clean the whole way down, a hostage charging her own ransom to the warden, and I have met accountants who would sign it. They came on the thin hour, of course, house porters with a writ speaker droning the lawful words at the gate. They opened the storeroom, took the season's coal, the tool steel, the stock of settings, and the wrapped four off the bench shelf. Fu, who at 60 chose to argue with 6 men, took, as the yard boys told it after, a staff butt across the shoulder and a boot when he went down, and his seating arm, the only arm, broke at the wrist against the bench edge. They also took the half-built piece he had been working, a brace for a crippled hauler, and it lay in the wreck of the bench slot afterward, half-seated, stone exposed. The most honest portrait of that night anyone could have carved. Work interrupted, mid-word. It stayed in that slot for a season. Nobody had the heart to move it, and then later, nobody had the hands. The 4. Its theft gets its own line. The deepest stone we ever held, cut from Yinnu's ruined years. Unspent because we were waiting to spend it on something that unsaid some of the harm. It rode out of our gate in a house basket, and the house would seed it in something profitable. And the last chance of that stone meaning anything was gone. Bad ground, Bai Yue had said. The ground had come for it. Yanru kept his side to the copper. He released her collar at the house counter, spoke her clearance to the gate captains, and he did it while his porters were still walking our coal out of the yard in slings, load after load. He does not cheat, not even traders. Especially not traitors, because a collector who shorts an informant never buys good information again. I wrote versions of that rule in another life, in a cubicle that smelled of burnt coffee. And in keeping his books straight that night, he bent them, because there is no honest entry for what he did. The house cannot buy its own property's obedience. That is ownership talking to itself, coin moved from one pocket to the other of the same coat. A collar released for information is a transaction with no lawful name. I went up to the house counter that evening and watched him stand there, the brass weights clicking in his palm as his fingers worked, hesitating in truth. For the first and only time in my sight, over how to log it. He logged it as a debt discharge, a small lie in brass. The only false weight on his string, and he hung it there himself, in public. Because the alternative was admitting the house pays wages to what it owns. I filed that false weight and told no one. Some stones you do not spend the season you find them. She came back to the yard the next evening. That is the fact people refuse when I tell this story, and it is the fact that defines her. She walked in through the gate she had sold, past the wreckage she had priced, free-necked, carrying her own bag. She stood in front of the household. Then she said, before anyone else could speak, "The schedule and the stores, that was me. Yanru paid in full. I am here for my things and my last wage." Bai Yue put down her tools. I have seen Bai Yue angry the way craftsmen get angry, at bad work, at wasted material. This was not that. This was cold to the bone. "Give her to the house," she said, to me, evenly. She sold our walls, let the walls have her. There is a symmetry. Even her rage files things. And Ba, 14 years old, stood up between them and hid her. There is no other word. He stepped bodily in front of the woman who had sold his home and said, "No." She taught me the roofs. She pulled the boss out of the fence row when the housemen had him. We do not sell people back. That is the whole law of this yard, or there is no yard. And he looked at me, not at them, to find out whether the law held. Everyone looked at me. The record should show I wanted, for about 3 breaths, to be a smaller man than the boy was. Then I ruled the only way the arithmetic of us allows. She stays if she chooses. Nobody here is sold twice. Han Chao heard the ruling, nodded once, as at a price confirmed, and then did the thing that undid the room. She took out her tallies and tried to settle accounts. "Final wage for the last span," she said, "minus damages attributable. I have computed both. The balance runs to me by 3 coppers. But I will waive it against the blanket I am taking." She stood there, free, alone, with her little counted fairness held out in front of her like a shield. And nobody took it, and for the first time since I have known her, the counting voice cracked. Not much. A hairline. The kind you hear only if you have spent a season learning where her seams run. And I had, and I heard it, and I said nothing about it. She had computed everything except what she was going to do next, and it was already tomorrow, and there was nowhere in the city that wanted her. And she had made herself free entirely, which is the loneliest condition there is. She slept on the roof that night, on the sold property, under the taken stock sky. Boss climbed up to her, uninvited, the traitor to traitors, and lay on her feet. I heard her talking to him for a long time. Couriers tell animals things they invoice humans for. I climbed up at dawn with 2 bowls, and we had the conversation we should have had 3 seasons earlier. And I will set down the spine of it. I asked why. She said, because the collar was a wall in my head. Every day, every plan, every route past his counter. You all worked around it so smoothly you stopped seeing it was made of me. He could pull the truth out of my mouth any market day, and you built your lives around that leak like furniture. So I priced the wall and knocked it down with the only coin on hand. Your wall's for my wall. I would not do it differently. I would time it better. The old man's wrist is the only line I miscounted. That is her whole confession, and it is not sorry, and I did not ask it to be. I asked the other question, why come back? And she was quiet for the length of a slow breath. Then she said, angrier at the sentence than at me, because I have 11 exits from this city memorized. And I stood at the gate with all 11 open, and the count would not close. Something in the books would not close, and she looked at Boss and at the bowls, and did not finish the arithmetic out loud, and I did not make her. Some sums are load-bearing precisely because nobody says them. The wreck below us was still a wreck. Fu's wrist was set and splinted by a middle-tier bone-setter who was not Su Yin, because Fu forbade us to call her into a house matter. The stores were gone, the coal was gone, the 4 was gone, the season's settings were gone. Our production, the thing the entire tier now leaned on, stopped exactly as the failure wave doubled, which was, of course, the timing Yan Ru had bought. He had not attacked me. He had removed my output at the moment of maximum demand, using my own courier's honesty about her own chains. Clean as frost. So I rebuilt with what was left in one night, on the assumption that the enemy knew everything. It is the only safe assumption after a sale. Stores split into thirds, held at chins, at the trough head, at a place only Ba and I knew. Schedules died, replaced by Ba's runner word, never twice the same. The bench moved to the back room, and the work went on at half speed, with a one-handed teacher shouting at a mastersmith who needed no instruction. And the mastersmith took the shouting, gently, because it was the only medicine anyone could get into the old man. 2 more things happened that week, and both belonged to the ledger, because both of them priced the years ahead. Neither cost me a copper on the day, which is how the expensive entries introduced themselves. Wrong came, looked at the wreck, and said nothing about clauses. She recounted her guards, doubled the gate watch at her own coin, and left a barrel of wine for Fu with no note. That is how that woman apologizes for a city she does not own. Han Cao watched the guards double and said quietly, to me, they are not for thieves. She is protecting her investment from its next mistake. Note who she thinks makes the mistakes here. I noted it. And on the last day of the span, sorting the salvage, I did what the wreck had been asking me to do all week. I sat down with the oldest men of the wash, the ones who had been washing when the 3 women were brought in on the cull cart a year and a lifetime ago. And I bought an evening of their memories with Chin's wine, because I wanted to know who had sold their hiding place, back at the start, before any of this, when they were just 3 strangers in a cart. The old men talked, as old men talk, in loops and corrections. A tip-off? Yes, everyone knew that. Somebody had whispered the house exactly where the 3 were sheltering. Gaomu paid for whispers in those days. Water for words. Everyone knew that too. And the whisperer, said the oldest of them, not unkindly, looking straight at me with his washed-out eyes. Well, you would know that best of anyone, boy. I walked home through the dark with the last piece of my inheritance in my hands. The name in everyone's memory was mine. I carried the name for 9 days and told no one. 9 days of eating at the same fire as 3 women whose ruin had my face on it. Holding the words in my mouth like a stone I could neither swallow nor spit. Pricing the right moment as I price everything. The right moment did not exist. I knew that on day 1. I was not waiting. I was hiding in the only currency I respect, delay. The record wants honesty here, so here it is. The man who whispered 3 hiding women to Gao Mu for a place at the water was not me. He died in wet tailings before I ever wore his hands. And the record does not care, because the debts of a body convey with the body. I had been spending his arrears since the first night in the ditch. I had simply believed, as you believe in floors, that the bread had been a gift. It was a payment. My first act in this world had been settling an account I did not know I owed, to 3 creditors who did not know they held it. The mountain called the question before I found my moment. Because the mountain always does. It has no patience for men pricing their confessions. Midspan, in the wet week, a stretch of the Old West heap came down on the sorting benches. 19 people were under and around it. Not the deep galleries, this was surface spoil, sodden and treacherous, and spoil kills you as dead as bedrock. The wash came running with shovels and bare hands. I came running with the household. For 2 hours the tier had no factions, only weight and time. We got 7 out fast. Then it went to knives and spoons, the fine work. Voices under the rubble, a hand at the bottom of a slot no wide man could enter. Ba went into the slots, again, because he is small and refuses not to. Bai Wei braced the runs with bench planks, calculating loads out loud in her audit voice while mud ran through her hair, and the soft spot at the center, the pocket where 2 voices still answered, kept slumping every time we cleared it. Wet spoil with no bones in it, drinking every prop we set. That is where the salt crumbs earned their place in this account. We had a jar of them at the yard, sweepings from the failure wave, shards and crumbles of dead house stone that Bai Yue would not throw out. Throwing out material is against her religion. Mine trash, saltborne, worthless. Except a broken binding shard still remembers its oath for a breath or two under pressure, as bench lore has it. It holds nothing for long. It holds something for a moment. We packed the salt crumbs into the slumping face like grit into a wound, 100 dead promises pressed into wet spoil, and for the space of 40 breaths, the pocket held its shape. Trash that this whole city had thrown away, holding a roof up with the last echo of its stolen oaths, while Ba hauled 2 washers out by the ankles. Then it let go, as she said it would, and by then the pocket was empty. Aunt Ma, watching from the line, said it for the whole tier. He shores mud with the house's lies. Even their garbage works harder for him. 19 went under. 19 came out breathing. The count could have closed there and been the best day of the season. Then Gao Mu closed it his way. He had worked the rescue too. I will not take that from him. Shoulder to shoulder in the wet, he is still the strongest back on the tier. And when the last washer came out, he stood up in the ring of exhausted, mud-slicked, adrenaline-lit people. And he was full of the thing that fills men after shared danger, which is warmth with nowhere to go. And he looked at me across the cleared pocket. He decided, in front of everyone, to be generous. Say what you like about the rat, he called out, honest and loud. This one digs, always was a worker. Best set of eyes I ever ran, back in the day. He gestured at me like a man toasting. Sharpest informer on this wash, this boy. Sold me the whisper on those 3 culls of his, you know, back before he went holy. And to think I only paid a water place for it. He laughed alone, as men laugh when the room has gone somewhere they have not noticed yet. Then he noticed. He was not attacking me. That is what made it unanswerable. He was reminiscing, praising a good tool in the plain, friendly, terrible voice of a man who has never once needed to lie. You cannot call a compliment slander. Every word was true. And the truth had my face on it. 3 women were standing in the mud, hearing it at the same instant, with 19 rescued neighbors and half the wash for witnesses. The pocket had 2 more voices in it when he started talking. That is the one mercy the mountain gave me. I did not have to choose between answering and working. Because there was no answering. I went back into the slot with the spoon and the rope, and I dug, with the name sitting on me for every eye to read. The crowd watched me dig, knowing. And I felt the watching change temperature against my back, breath by breath, as water goes off the boil. We brought the last 2 out alive. Nobody cheered the second one. The tier stood in the rain around 19 saved lives and 1 spent name, doing its arithmetic in silence. And the arithmetic was fair. That is the part I need written straight. Nobody wronged me that day. The bill was real. It was mine by inheritance and by spending. The collection was conducted, as everything down here is conducted, in public, at the worst hour, by a man who genuinely did not understand he was collecting. Xue was in the 3rd row. I did not have to look for him. A year of 2 faces, watching me rise with one and remembering me with the other. Here at last was his vindication, the rat outed as a rat by the man who ran them both. And the crowd remembered him too. That is the thing about a tier's memory. It holds everyone's account at once. When the murmur moved, it moved through him first. And it was not fellowship. Men stepped away, a half step each as you step off wet rope. They left him standing in his own cleared circle. The whisper system had 2 names in it. The second name had confirmed a false tray charge at a lord's elbow once, for nothing, for favor, and the wash had watched that too. His circle has never closed since. He walks the tier to this day inside a small moving emptiness, and no one, including me, has ever once bothered to punish him, which is his punishment. The household heard it as each of them is built to hear. Bai Yue went to the dates. That evening, wet hair still unbraided, she reconstructed the calendar out loud. Cull cart schedules, the arrival of the 3, the water-place ledgers of Gaomu's old queue, and arrived at the verdict with her tongs. The whisper predates you, she said, to the room, not to me. The man who sold us died in the tailings. The man who fed us is a different debtor who assumed the estate. Fact 1, Fact 2. She set them side by side like calibration weights. What you all do with the facts is your own craft, mine is done. It was the kindest thing she knew how to make, a true measurement, and she made it for me, and I have kept it. Han Xiao, 3 weeks out from her own confession on the roof, laughed once, short, at the ceiling. Of course, she said, of course. The yard's whole law is nobody gets sold twice, and the founder, the yard now learned, had written it about himself. Then she pulled out her tallies and did the thing that is her love and her armor and her tell. She computed my debt at the fire, sticks laid in rows across her knee, the night rain ticking on the shutters. Bread advanced to 3 women, interest at ditch rates against 1 whisper, damages assessed by outcome, cart, collar, cull. She worked it in silence, longer than any honest sum needs, and then she put the tallies away without announcing a balance, which from Han Qiao is a scream. Some accounts, her hands had discovered, do not close. She has never billed me for that night. It is the only line she has ever left open on purpose. Su Yin had come up the tier with the first shovelful, because 19 underspoil outbids any quarrel she has ever held. She worked the hurt line all through the digging, and she was standing in the crowd when Gao Mu made his toast, and she heard it entire. She came to the yard at dusk, the first time since the gate. She stood in front of me with the rain still on her, and she said, "Level, is it true?" And I said, "It is true of this body and its debts." And then I said the whole of it, the tailings, the inheritance, the bread that was a payment, 9 days of knowing and hiding, all of it, plainly, because she of all people had earned the unpriced version. She listened as she reads a wound. Then she said the sentence she had walked up 2 tiers to say, "The body is the man, stone man. I set bones, I do not set souls. I have never met a soul. I have met bodies that keep their debts and bodies that do not. This body fed us before it knew it owed us. I watched this body dig today until its hands bled. That is my whole diagnosis." She picked up her bag. At the gate she turned and added, "Quieter, but you knew for 9 days and hid it. And that was the other body talking. Watch which one of them is gaining." Then she went back down to her lanes, and the door she left open behind her was exactly 1 finger wider than the door she had arrived through, and I have built on narrower ledges. The last accounting of that night belongs to the 3 of them together, and I was not invited to it, and I know only its result. They talked till late at Chin's. The 3 women my inherited whisper had put in a coal cart at a corner table over wine I quietly paid for, and Chin quietly refused payment for, so the wine ended up paid twice and drunk once, which Han Xiao would appreciate. What was said there stays theirs. What came back was this. They came back. All 3, next morning, work clothes on, and not 1 word of ceremony. The only visible verdict was Bai Yue's, who reorganized my bench while I slept, which she does only to people she has decided to keep. Count the wet week then. The house's garbage earned a permanent place in our kit, and 3 women chose, each by her own arithmetic, to keep the account open. And the cost line, which does not wash out. The tier looks at me differently now, and it is right to. Not colder, exactly. Corrected. The stone man's first miracle was a debt payment, and everyone knows it, and the knowing has changed what my name weighs. I am no longer the inexplicable mercy that fell into a ditch. I am a man working off an inheritance, which is smaller and truer, and in the long run, I would come to learn, far sturdier to build on. But that winter, it just weighed. Fu, splinted wrist in his lap, one-eyed by the fire, gave the week its closing line, because he always does. "Every setter in this city, boy," he said, "starts by working off the ground his fire ruined. You are just the first one honest enough to do it in daylight. Now hand me the small file. My wrist is broken, not my standards." I handed him the file and went back to my ledger, because the failure wave was still climbing the tiers, and the house had gone quiet. Quiet from the house is a price being set. Somewhere above us, a clerk was deciding which of our names to write first. The house answered the failure wave the only way a lender knows. When the merchandise breaks, call in the loans. Word came down on a market morning through Bay's corners first and the criers an hour later. The Hollow Row quarter would be bound in settlement. 41 households, all in arrears since the wave killed their work. Collars for the quarter, fitted in batches, starting in 2 days. Not a raid, a procedure. Ernyang's old shed under Kong's seal now would run the fittings in the house yard, batch by batch, family by family, as you shoe horses. Yanru's arithmetic, executed by clerks, lawful to the last copper. 41 households for 1 bad season, because the house was bleeding value and value must come from somewhere. And the somewhere is always the same address. I had 2 days, no Su Yin's network, half a workshop, a one-handed teacher with a splint, and no stones of a grade that could argue with a house writ. What I had was the thing I swore in a cellar I would not use again. I had 11 years of knowing exactly how to find what a man cannot afford to lose and press. I am going to record all 7 in order, because the plan's whole horror is that it worked. The record of things that work gets consulted later by people like me. They should see the bill at the bottom of the page. The fitting queue needed 7 consents to run, not the victims, the machines. A house binding day runs on small cooperations. A contractor for the yard, guards for the line, a licensed fitter, porters, criers, plus a rights man to bless the iron, and a tally clerk. Remove the consents, the day stalls. One consent had already slipped the start by days. Stall it twice, the writ lapses into review. And review, with the house's attention pinned on its own cracking walls, was a grave I could push this into. So I went shopping for 7 men's breaking points, with the panel reading lax over my shoulder like a partner at cards. The yard contractor, his lack read, standing. He was proud of rising from the wash, and his rise was mortgaged, and I found where. He billed the house for timber bought as salvage from his brother-in-law's demolitions, at new-cut prices. I did not threaten him. I asked him one thing, at his own gate, politely. Whether the house surveyor who walked his stacks next week should be told where the grain figures came from, or whether his crews might discover, regrettably, a 2-day shortage of sound scaffold for the binding yard. He discovered the shortage before I finished the sentence, and billed the house for the delay, which I choose to admire. The guard sergeant. Lack, 2 orders. His captain owed the house and leaned one way. His old mother's lane owed me its water and leaned the other. The man was being torn quietly in half. I did not resolve his conflict. I weaponized his procedure. I had Wrong's clerk stand at the counter and demand aloud whose writ governed mixed-tier musters, and the question did what questions do. It froze him. A sergeant with contested orders posts no line until somebody above him rules, and everybody above him was busy. The apprentice fitter, standing in for Ern Young, who had reported sizing errors and been benched, his lack, his father's debt, the one he became an apprentice to outwork. I bought it, outright, through Wrong, at a discount because distressed debt was cheap that month. Then I had Ba deliver the tally to him snapped in half with no note. A man who no longer owes the house does not have to hold the yoke for them. He reported sick. His hands, he said, a fitter's complaint. Nobody could prove the hands were fine, and the only person qualified to check was benched for honesty. The rights man, Monkdung, who blesses the iron and makes the queue kneel for it. Lack, an audience. I gave him a better one. A grief vigil on the trough square for the waves dead, same morning as the fitting. Lamps, a crowd, his name spoken as the man who called it. He chose the crowd. Rights men always choose the crowd. The iron would go unblessed, and an unblessed binding, half this city believes, sits crooked on the soul. 3 Porter families refused the morning shift on that alone. The widow who cooks the yard's day meal. Her lack was the cruelest to use, and I used it. Honesty. She had been underfeeding the house porters for a year, skimming for her grandsons, terrified daily. I told her I knew, and that the house tallies would survive her taking 2 days away to grieve her husband's memory at Dung's vigil, and that her ladle counts would look right when she returned. I fixed her theft to buy her absence. She wept on my hands. I priced the weeping and moved on. Read that sentence twice, because I wrote it as I did it. Fast, the tally clerk. Lack, terror of his own error. Yanru's school. His string of weights had 1 bead worn wrong, and he knew it and had hidden it for a month. I let him find, on his stool one morning, a new bead, correct, anonymous. Then Ba mentioned in his hearing that the stone man checks all strings on binding days. He requested transfer by noon. Not flight. Transfer. The precise cowardice I had measured him for. And the 7th. The 7th was a collector the house brought in when the schedule began to slip. A freelance pressure man off the caravan roads, hired to unstick what was sticking. He found me before I found him at Chin's at my table. He sat down across from me with his tea. We knew each other in one breath as 2 surgeons know each other's stitching. He laid out my week on the table like a hand of cards: contractor, sergeant, fitter, monk, widow, clerk. He named each press correctly, admiring 2 of them by name. Then he offered me the professional courtesy of our shared trade, a fee to step aside. And I offered him mine. I told him what I knew of the caravan ledgers he had left uncollected in the East, and who was pricing his absence there, and that a man of his skill should not be in Sichuan this season. The house that hired him was the house whose stone was failing, because collectors do not get paid from under rubble. We drank the tea. He left the city 2 days later, politely, without stepping aside so much as declining renewal. At the door of Chin's he said the only sentence from that year I still hear in his voice and not mine. Good pressure, brother. Wrong ground. Get out of this trade before it prices you. I have wondered since whether he knew he was talking to a man already priced. The binding day came, and the binding day stalled. No scaffold, no line, no fitter, no blessing, no meal, no tally, no enforcer. The collars stayed in their crates in the house yard, and the morning ran out with no hand willing to lift them. 41 households stood in Hollow Row with their doors shut. The writ lapsed into review at dusk. In the review season, the house's attention went where I had bet it would go, to its own walls. The quarter is unbound to this day. That is the victory. It is real. 41 households, and I will not let this page pretend otherwise. Now the bill. Anchao followed me through all 7 days with her tallies out, delighted, taking what she called professional notes. Press 3, elegant, she announced at the fire, undervalued at twice the cost. Press 5, the widow, ugly but load-bearing. She graded my extortions like a buyer at a horse fair, out loud, nightly, and her delight was the mirror I could not put down. She recognized the work. It was her kind of work. I had spent a season being better than this. The season was over, and the person most fluent in what I had become was the one the household trusted least. Comedy, if you can lift it. Suyin came up once, midweek, stood at the yard gate, and watched me brief Ba on the widow. She did not come in. She said one sentence from the gate. Count the ones who wept on your hands, Stone Man, and check the count again in a year. Then she left, and her sentence sat in my coat all week like the brass tab used to. Baya said nothing. All 7 days, nothing. She worked her bench, took my instructions, built what I asked. Her silence was not anger, and I would have paid for anger. It was the silence of a master watching an apprentice do flawless work in a technique she had prayed he would never learn. On the 7th evening, she set down her tools and said, to the bench, not to me, the seat is perfect, the stone is wrong, and went to bed. She was not talking about a setting. And on the 8th day, I collected my wage, and the wage taught me what all of it had been. A man from Hollow Row came to thank me. A carter, one of the 41, sent by the quarter with their pooled gratitude, and he stood in my yard and said the words, proper and true, my name in them, tears standing in his eyes, the quarter behind him in spirit. Everything my machine feeds on, delivered in ceremony. And it came off him wrong. The tear rang on the stones, and I picked it up, and it was gray in my palm, gray as fog, salt to the core, and it crumbled while I held it. The first salt my own harvest ever made. Baya read the crumbs and said what I already knew, because I had stood in a warm gallery once and heard a keeper's ladle scrape. Nothing was wrong with his thanks, she said. Something was wrong with the field it grew in. You did not free that quarter for the quarter. You freed it to win and to feel the old work in your hands again, and grief knows its farmer, Stone Man. It always knows. The law of my own gift, proven on my own hands, in my own yard. Forced grief gives salt, and grief pressed by 7 extortions, however clean, however lawful, had been farmed. I was holding the house's whole crime in miniature, grown in my own field in 8 days, and the difference between me and the quiet floor had come down to volume and manners, as I had thought at a terrace once, believing myself to be describing a danger and not making a forecast. Count the week, because even this week gets counted. 41 households free, doors shut, quarter whole. 7 men bent, none broken, every press reversible, every secret kept. A collector's respect, a rival's warning, a widow's weeping, I priced at speed. 1 gray stone, my first, crumbling in my palm like a verdict. And in the crumbs, one thing worth the whole tuition, though it took me a season more to spend it. My salt and the house's salt were the same substance, which meant their whole mountain of failure was not a different crime from mine. It was my weak, industrialized. Bayue swept the gray crumbs into a sample jar against her religion of never wasting material and set it on the shelf beside the mine shards, and the 2 jars sat there matching, and the shelf said what nobody at my fire would say out loud that night. The method works. That was never the question. The question is what the method makes, and now we had it in a jar, labeled mine. 2 jars stood on our shelf, my salt and the mine's salt, matching, and Bai Yue looked at them for 3 days the way a magistrate looks at twin confessions. On the 4th day she washed her hands, braided her hair tight, and said, I am taking a commission to my teacher. Nobody sends me. I am going as a setter with work for a bench. It is the one door in this city that opens to craft and nothing else. I asked what commission. She said, I will ask Master Kong to make me a piece. From fresh house stone, this season's cut, his own hands, at his own fire, while I watch. A teaching demonstration, master to former pupil, entirely traditional, entirely unrefusable. She was quiet a moment, and then his hands will learn what his shelf has been hiding from his eyes, because hands do not lie to a craftsman. Eyes will, hands never. I offered to come. She said no. You are a market argument. I am his student. This has to happen in the grammar he trusts, or it is just the crier's rumor with better manners. She took her tools, her measurements. The flexing scrap came as a control sample she did not intend to show unless craft demanded. She walked up the tiers to the hearth yards alone. What follows she told us that night, flat and precise, the way she reports all measurements, and I set it down in her order. Kong received her in the second yard, before his apprentices, because a master teaches in public or not at all. The old courtesies held. She stated the commission, a binding clasp, fresh stone, his hands, her observation. He looked at her bare neck a long moment, the collar he had surely known about and never once mentioned. Then he sent a boy to the stores for a packet of this season's cut and said, "Watch then. Watch and correct me if my hand is aged." His little joke. Nobody in that yard had ever corrected him. A few apprentices smiled at their benches, the careful smile you give a rich man's joke. The joke had 40 years of being safe, and it had one morning left. The first stone failed on the mandrel. He had it seated, true and clean by every rule. As the setting ring took pressure, the stone sheared. Nothing like the clean shear of true stone, soft, with a wet click. The shards went into his palm. The yard went silent. A boy reached for bandages, and Kong looked at his hand, shards crawling a finger width under the skin, and said, "Get the next stone." He did not bandage the hand. Beauties said this twice, so I write it twice. He did not bandage the hand. He took the second stone from the packet, examined it, pronounced it sound aloud, as he has pronounced stone sound for 40 years. He seated it, and it failed the same way at the same pressure. More shards went in beside the first, and the third. By the third, the yard was not breathing, and the apprentices had stopped pretending to work. Files lay where hands had left them, and the fire ate its coal unattended. He chose the third stone himself, from the packet's heart, the best face, examined it longest, seated it slowest. A hand bleeding around old shards, every fault of angle and bed eliminated. Nothing left in the work but the material and the man. It flexed. It clouded. It came apart under his fingers like river ice, and the third set of shards walked into him next to the others. Master Kong stood at his own bench with a ruined hand and 40 years of certainty in pieces on the mandrel. Then he straightened up and he said it, to the yard, to the apprentices, to the boy with the bandages, in the level voice he uses for grading work because it was a grading. "The stone is false. Not my hand has not changed, you all watched it 3 times. The material is false and has been for years, and I called every man who said so a liar or a fool, because I proved my judgments in this fire, and this fire proves them still. A master does not lie about material. Write down what you saw, tell it exactly. The house's stone fails inward, and everything I have certified for 10 years is under review as of this hour, beginning with me, under review." His own words, the collector's words, out of the one mouth in Sichuan that no crier can shout down. He dismissed the yard, sat down on his workbench like a man whose legs had been argued out from under him, and let them bandage the hand at last. Beauties stayed. Of everyone, she stayed, and the two of them sat in the empty yard among the shards of his life's certainty. What they said to each other she has never reported, and I have never asked. Some measurements belong to the instruments that made them. But at the gate, she said, he stopped her with one question. "The washman's stones, you have handled them. Do they fail?" And she said, "They do not fail. They go gray when their people leave him, and light again when the people return, and they never once shatter." And Kong stood with his bandaged hand and said, "Then the fault was never the making. The fault is the taking, and that is going to cost this city more than my hand. Tell your washman to hurry." She did not know yet what he meant by hurry. Neither did I. We learned inside the week, because his sentence went through Sichuan like a crack through a frozen lake. A master's word is the one written thing this city has, written in 40 years of proofs. By morning, every apprentice from that yard had told a bench, every bench a street. Kong says the stone is false. Kong bled proving it. Kong put himself under review. And the city did not riot. It did something quieter and much worse. It stopped trusting its own hardware. A merchant looked at the warding stone over his door that had cost his grandfather a fortune and wondered. A carter checked his cargo oaths twice, then a third time. Debt wives touched their collars in the street with a new expression, not hope exactly, arithmetic. If the stone is false, what exactly is holding? And things that are held by belief as much as by binding began, everywhere, at once, to slip. The failure count that week doubled, and kept climbing the week after, as the lady of the house had promised me it would, except now every crack came with a chorus, because now every crack had been foretold by the one voice the city believed. Panic does not need everyone, it needs the sober people. And Kong had converted the sober people in one afternoon at one bench with 3 stones and his own hand. Madame Xue answered the only way her position allows. Volume. The quiet floor went to double rotation. I learned it from Ernyang's requisitions before Ba's corners confirmed it. Twice the fittings, twice the troughs. And the sizing errors that a careful woman had been seeding into every order now mattered twice as much, and so did the risk to the careful woman. The house was pedaling harder on a wheel that made the hill steeper. Everyone in this account who understood arithmetic could see the cliff from here. The horror was that the woman driving could see it best of all, and had no other road. Bai Yue did not come home. She sent word by a yard boy, correct and brief. Master Kong has requested her assistance in reviewing 10 years of certified settings. The request is craft, the duty is real, the work will take what it takes. She had lodged at the hearthyards, my mastersmith, my bench's spine, the hands that turned my stones from rocks into arguments. She was living at my enemy's fire, working beside the man who had spent a season strangling us. Because a master in ruin had asked his best student for help, and in her grammar that request outranks everything, including us, including me, and she would say so to my face without slowing her hands. Fu, when he heard, grunted and said, "Correct, girl. You do not leave a master alone with a review like that, it kills them." And then, into his cup, so I almost missed it. Kong taught her before the house broke her hands. He taught me before the house took my arm. He grew every real pair of hands in this city, boy, and now he knows what his house fed them all. Do not make her choose. You will lose and you will deserve to. I did not make her choose. I sent her tools up by Ba with a whetstone she liked, and no message, because the absence of a message was the message. She kept the whetstone. The household got quieter by one register, the precise one. And the bench in the back room stood with her tool order undisturbed, like a room kept for someone at sea. Han Xiao priced the arrangement in one line, gentler than her custom. Your best asset is on loan to your worst enemy, and both of you are pretending it is about work. Even my tallies cannot price that. Then she doubled the yard watch on her own schedule, because tenderness in her dialect is logistics. Count the week of the old man, because it cost me nothing and everything. The house's fiction died in one afternoon at Kong's own bench, and the man who had guarded it broke it himself, because his craft outranked his side. And my own bench short its master, my household short its most exact voice, my evenings short one running audit of my soup, my plans and my character, an audit I had somehow started needing. The comedy of the week, because even that week had one, was Yuntai, and it was the kind of comedy that ruins evenings. I say comedy because the other word for a man like that costs too much to use. The young setter learned the truth with the rest of the yard, set down his tools while the word crossed his bench. He processed it the only way he is built to. Correctly. He went to his own commissions of the past 3 years, door to door. He told every client, unprompted, that his work might be compromised through no fault of theirs, and offered to re-inspect it free. Then he came to our yard, bowed to me, and apologized. For the coal gate, he said, my schedule information enabled an attempted crime against you. The attempt failed, but my conduct contributed, and I have owed you this call for a year. He had worked out the raid, alone, from dates, and his response to discovering that I had tried to rob his fire was to apologize to me for making it thinkable. Han Xiao listened to him with her mouth slightly open, her brush hanging above the day's tally. The first time I have seen her fail to price a man on sight. When he left, bowing to the yard, to Fu, and inexplicably to Boss, who accepted the tribute as long overdue, she said faintly, "That thing is not survivable. Somebody will kill him out of sheer inconvenience. A man that honest is a standing insult to every crooked ledger on the tiers. Guard him, or the city loses its last working conscience." So we did. Quietly, from that week on. 2 of Ba's corners walk Yuntai's routes to this day, and he's never once noticed. That is itself the entire problem with him, and the entire reason it matters. The last line of that week belongs to Boss. He walked the yard twice at dusk, stood a long time at Bai Yue's cold bench with his blind face working. Then he lay down under it, in her tool order, where her feet used to be. He sighed the sigh of the only member of this household with no strategy at all. The rest of us went to bed pretending we had not all wanted to do the same, and the shed slept badly, 1 register short. The bill for that afternoon was already running above us. A certified master recanting in his own yard moves prices, and the people who had lent us their shelter read prices for a living. Their arithmetic on us had a new column now, and columns like that fill fast. Madame Xue kept her promise, which was the attack. Everything I touched that season went faster, and none of it was my doing. Coal arrived before order. A blocked lane cleared overnight. An inspector who had been circling Chin's kitchen was promoted upward and away. The lady of the house had stopped resisting me entirely and begun, with terrible precision, to help. Han Qiao's second set of counts, the ones she showed nobody, she finally showed me. Our intake had tripled in a season, she said. Names on the help lists, households leaning on the yard, people fixed to my ledger. And the wave was doubling under it. Do the two curves together, courier style, she said, and tell me the date they cross. She had done them. She put the date in front of me, and it was inside the year. Past that crossing, every person I had ever lifted became weight I could not hold if the fixing failed. She is protecting her investment, House Xue said, by making it too big to stop. Growth is her knife now. You are being helped to death. I felt it in the body before I believed the counts. The rescues came faster than the settling. A man raised on Tuesday wobbled by month's end because the city under him was wobbling, and every wobble put his weight back on my shoulders for days. I walked that season like a porter on stairs, loaded both directions. I called it strength in public because the tier watched my posture as sailors watch weather. Then Wrong called in her ground, and the season learned what a real floor dropping feels like. She came herself, which she owed me, and she brought account men, which told me everything before she spoke. Stone man, she said, without theater for the first time in our acquaintance, I am pulling out. The collars I hold, your people's bonds. My claim on the stone man's 43 tails, bound years and all. The yard, the furnace, the coal contracts. Sold, all of it, to House Xue, at a price I will not embarrass either of us by naming. The house terms, she began. She caught herself. The house offer came sealed in speech before witnesses. And my captains have families. Your city is cracking faster than your stones can catch. And I am a merchant, not a martyr. The second price, remember? You were told it always comes. This is me, paying mine before the market shuts. The exit clause held. I will say that for her, and she made sure I could. Every bonded name got their posted price called out at her gate before the transfer. One last chance to buy free at honest numbers. Between us, with Chin's Kitchen and the Trough Network standing surety, we bought out 9, counted aloud at the gate, name by name. The rest, 11 names, passed with the yard and the fire and the anvils into the hands of House Xue, which is to say, into the portfolio of the woman who was helping me. She now owned my forge, my ground, and the collars of 11 people I had promised better to. Wrong left me the quilts, all of them, off her own carts, with the seal picked out of the corners so the house could not claim them. That is what apology looks like in her dialect. And I have kept one to this day. I do not entirely know why, except that the woman taught me the difference between an investor and an ally. She did it by being, at the end, precisely and honestly, neither. We moved the bench back to the wash the same night, to the old wall, to Fu's leaking shed. We carried our trade on our backs down the tiers we had climbed. Nobody said the obvious out loud. A year of building. And we stood again exactly where the ditch had left us, minus a mastersmith, minus a forge, plus a city coming apart, plus several hundred people who now looked to a man with no fire, no yard, and a spine full of other people's winters. Kang Shi came back in the middle of it. He came back the way Su Yin had always said he would, in the worst week, through the failure wave. The ropes in her cellar were needed for 3 fresher cases, and the watching rota had holes in it. He went out through one of the holes, a big, quiet, flickering man walking the lanes his body remembered. The wave met him with a dozen fresh salt-mad and 100 panicking bindings. And somewhere on Cord Street, of all streets, he began to break things again. This time the street had no wonder left in it, only fear and tools. I got there in time to see it end, and I set it down because I owed him a witness the first time and failed. Su Yin walked into his flicker again. The same bonesetter's voice, the same shoulder grammar, but this time she carried her bag openly. When his minded of himself came round, she asked him, in front of me, in front of the street, the question I had refused him in a cellar. Now, brother? And Kang Shi, in his own voice with his own eyes, said, Now, yard woman, while it is me asking, thank you for waiting until I could ask twice. She did it properly. There on the street he broke, herbs and stillness, his head in her lap. It took as long as it takes and no longer. The man went out of the world as himself, mid-sentence about a die cart he had carried 30 years ago, easy, unafraid, done. His wife buried him the second time with a straight face. Yun Ru's silver had bought her a year of practice at the grief, and when the lane asked how a dead man died twice, she said, Ask the house that sold the first funeral. I did not stop it. I stood in the street and held the watching line back with my presence and let her work. That was my whole contribution, and it was the correct one. It cost me exactly what it should have. Every argument I had made in the cellar died on that street, in order, quietly. The evidence argument, dead. The city had all the evidence now and more. The mercy argument, hers all along. She closed his eyes, looked up at me across him, and did not say what she was entitled to say. That was the conversation. Both of us knew every line of it without performance. I had been wrong by 1 year and 1 man's worth of hours. She let the arithmetic stand unspoken, which is the only mercy her trade dispenses to people like me. The wave crested that month. I will give the numbers because numbers are what I have. 40 failures a week across the tiers, 3 fresh salt mad in 8 days. The hearthyards running double, the dairy running double. Nyang's sizing errors now salted through 100 fittings, a slow crime inside a fast one. And my bench, one one-handed old man, one courier, one boys network, one blind animal, and me, feeding 2s and 3s into a flood that ate 4s. So I did the thing that every voice in my ledger called madness, and I still think it was the sanest hour of my year. I stopped. Not everything. I stopped growing. I took the help lists, all the new names, all the leaning households the ladies' assistants had funneled to me, and I gave them away. To Chin's kitchen, with its debt memory and its ladles. To the trough-head women who ran the water queue by their own law. To Dung's vigil crowds, to the lane elders, and to the quarter that Hollow Row had become since it learned its doors could stay shut. I spent a week walking my dependents to other people's tables and saying, in each place, the same sentence, hold each other, I cannot hold this many, and the man who tries becomes the thing you are fleeing. Han Qiao fought me the whole week, tallies out, voice cracking on the arithmetic. Every name you hand off is a name that could feed the machine that keeps the rest alive, she said. You are disarming in a war, slowing down in a flood. Explain the sense of it, and I gave her the only answer I had, which was Kong's sentence from the gate. The fault is the taking. She stood with that a long moment, closed the tallies and said, then we are betting the whole book on giving. And she wrote it in, because that is her way of kneeling. Ba's network took the handoff hardest because his corners had been the funnel. Pride runs through that boy like grain through wood. But he built the new routes anyway, the ones that led to other people's doors. Within a fortnight, he was invoicing the lane elders for referrals. I let him, because a tithe on solidarity is still solidarity, and 15-year-olds need wins. And Boss, who cannot count, delivered the season's verdict anyway. He stopped bringing the needy to me. I watched it happen with my own eyes on the trough square. He found a shaking man, circled him once, and led him, gently, by tugged sleeve, to Chin's door instead of mine. The animal had understood the strategy before half my household did. Fu laughed so hard at my face that he had to sit down on his splinted wrist. That stopped the laughing, which started Ba laughing. The yard we no longer owned echoed off the walls of the shed we did. The worst night of the crest, we worked fire in the open because there was no other fire left to us. 3 quarters on the east slope panicked together, a chain of collar failures and one flickering man on a roof. The lane law was an hour from rope law. What that panic needed was not rescue. It needed something visible holding, anything, one thing in the quarter that could be pointed at. So we built a bonfire in the trough square, dragged Fu's bench iron to it. We borrowed tongs from a horrified farrier and did settings in the open air like barbarians. Fu directing one-handed, me as his second hand. 3 hands between us, one of them splinted and none of them qualified. The farrier's tongs too long for my grip and the bonfire spitting more spark than heat. We seated the half-built brace from the wrecked bench, the one nobody had the heart to move, and 2 crude 2s into gate bars, ugly work, field work. Glowing iron quenched in a water trough while 3 quarters watched, and it held. The brace went onto the crippled hauler it had always been meant for. The gate bars went onto the panic lanes, and the east slope had its pointable things, and the rope law went back into its coils. For one day and one night, crude work done in public did what fine work in private never has. Then the gate bars failed, both within an hour of each other, as Fu had promised they would. Bad beds, rushed seats. I stood in the square expecting the panic back. It did not come back. That is the finding I filed from the entire crest. The quarter had watched the failure too, watched us come back at dawn without being called and start again. Somehow the coming back held better than the stone had. Aunt Ma put it about that the stone man's work breaks honest. As reputations go, that is not the one I was building, but it is the one that lasted. Count the crest and count it straight. A patron gone, a forge lost, 11 names passed into the enemy's hand with my promises still on them. A man I owed a death, paid at last by better hands, at street price. A city at 40 failures a week and doubling, held less by me than by a web of kitchens, queues, vigils, and lane law. I had spent a desperate week weaving that web out of my own unraveling, and one strange, load-bearing fact underneath the wreckage. Han Qiao's new counts confirmed it by month's end with grudging italics in her voice. The names I gave away held better than the names I had kept. Settling rates up, returns to my ledger down. The web held where the man had wobbled. The lesson was not that I was unnecessary. I was still spending myself daily, and the spending still mattered. The lesson was worse and better. The thing I had built worked best exactly where I had stopped holding it. Somewhere in that arithmetic was the shape of the only ending this could have. I was not ready to look at it yet, and the city was about to make me, because I still owed one promise from the 4th part of this account to an old man with gravel lungs. And that season, with the waves still falling, Lao Kui began, at last, to die. Lao Kui stopped being able to walk to the trough head in the first cold week. And we both knew what the ledger said. 30 years of the mountain's dust does not negotiate its endings. He had months in him by Su Yin's honest count, then weeks. One gray morning she came up from the lanes herself to tell me it was days, and to remind me, in her flattest working voice, that I had a promise outstanding, and that she intended to audit its performance personally, not in the ditch. A floor over me, a wall at my side, my name known in the room. The whole invoice, a year and a half old, priced across a handshake for a map. The map had given this tier its water and me my first war. I had been paying installments on it all along. His plank seat at the trough head, his warm corner at the shed, his name known to every child Ba ran. Now the last payment stood due, and I discovered, going to make it, that I was not the only creditor in the queue. The wash had its own account with the old man, and the wash does not let a debt close without attending. It came to pay in person. He died over 4 days in Fu's shed on a real bed that Chin sent up from her own back room, under Rong's unsealed quilt, with the door propped open at his own instruction. Because a man who has slept 30 years in the open does not learn walls at the end, and the tear came through that door in a slow, unforced procession. No one organized it, and no one could have. Washers he had trained, women whose children he had watched at the troughs, 2 of the 19 from the spoil heap, the farrier whose tongues we had ruined. They came, sat a while, said a thing or said nothing, and went. And the old man received them like a magistrate holding final court. He corrected everyone's memories of everything, happier than I had ever seen him. I sat the nights. That was mine to do, and I did not price it. And noticing that I had not priced it was its own small landmark on a long road. We talked, when he wanted to. The old galleries, the water, the crosscut and the roof that had wanted burying us. On the 3rd night, he looked at me a long time and said, "You know what I bought with that map, boy?" I said, "A floor, a wall, a name in the room," and he said, "No. I bought being spent instead of being saved. You spent me on this tier, this last year and a half, best rate an old man ever got. Do not go soft at the end and ruin my books." On the last morning, he asked for the door propped wider, so he could see the light on the trough water down the yard. The water he had found, running in the channel he had remembered into being. He watched it a while with the whole household in the room. Fu at the wall, Han Xiao in the doorway pretending to be passing, Ba on the floor, Su Yin with her hand on his wrist doing her trade's last arithmetic, and Boss across his feet like a deadfall. And at the very end he laughed, a small gravel laugh, and said, "Look at that. A floor, a wall, and every name I own in one room. I die owed nothing. Do you know how rich that is? On this mountain." Nobody in the room could speak, so he did the last line himself, because of course he did. He looked straight at me and said, "Paid in full, counting man. Say it back." And I said it back, "Paid in full, grandfather." And he nodded once, the way he nodded at a correct tally. He went out on the next breath as easily as a man stepping off a low step. The tear was his own, and it came at that laugh, one drop off the old gray face, and it rang on the bed frame like a coin dropped in a temple. Nobody in the room moved to touch it, because everybody knew what it was and nobody wanted the moment to be about that. It was Su Yin in the end who took it up and put it in my palm and closed my fingers on it and said, "His last wage. Spend it the way he said. Do not go soft." Fu read it that evening, and his one eye came up wet and fierce. "A hold," he said, "deep as the crosscut, deeper than the 4 we lost. Grief that got its answer, boy, that is what this breed is. And few griefs on this mountain were ever answered harder than that old man's. He is the strongest stone this bench has seen. He put it down like a relic. And I know what it is for, and so do you." The weight left me at the funeral. The mechanics go on the page. Because the room should know how the ledger closes accounts it can never reopen. We buried him by the trough head, at his own instruction, where he could audit the water forever. And the wash came, all of it, in its work clothes, because he had asked that nobody lose a day's share on his account. And the promise, being kept to the last clause, settled. 30 years of borrowed spine and gravel lungs lifted off me between the first shovel of earth and the last, not gradually, all at once, as a porter's load comes off at the door. I straightened up at that graveside as I had not in a year, truly straightened, vertebra by vertebra, in front of the whole tier. And the tier watched the stone man stand up out of a dead man's debt. It understood exactly what it was watching, because this city reads bodies as other cities read notices. There is one more piece of work from those days. It is the worst-made thing in this whole account, and I am prouder of it than of anything my name is on. The farrier, on his bedside visit, had wept a small tear over old Tong business and old kindness. A one, barely a stone at all, the humblest break a ledger can record. And I asked Fu, the night before the burial, to talk my hands through seating it. Not his hands, mine. A grave plate for the trough head with the old man's name on it. and a 1-grade hold in the corner so the cut of the name would hold against frost and thumbwear and forgetting. I did everything wrong that can be done wrong at a brazier. The bed cut shallow, the seat proud, the quench too fast. Fu supplied commentary throughout in the language he reserves for apprentices and governments. The stone sat crooked. The piece holds. But it holds as I held that first night in the ditch, barely, stubbornly, on effort instead of craft. Bai Yue, when she finally saw it a season later, stood over it for a long moment. Then she delivered the kindest audit of her career. Structurally indefensible, she said. Do not ever fix it. We buried him with my crooked plate at his head, the first thing in this world seated by my own hands. And if you want to know what it does one thing. The name stays sharp. Frost has not blunted it, boots have not worn it, and no one who stops at the trough head has to ask who found the water. A 1-grade stone, a botched seat, and the only work of mine I am certain will outlast every clever thing I ever built. The funeral meal was at Chin's, and it was the warmest hour this account has held since the duck. The whole tier ate, properly, off trestles in the lane, because Chin declared the old man's memory good for it. She collected against futures with a ferocity that would have made him cackle. The wash ate until it was full, which I had never once seen. Then it got loud, and then it got funny, as wakes go when the dying was done right. And half the lane ended up arguing about who would die next and whether their send-off would match this one. They bid up their own funerals like market futures. Han Qiao opened an actual futures column on it. I wish I were inventing that. She took 9 subscriptions before Chin threw a ladle at her. It was at that table, in that noise, that the sentence I had been circling for 2 seasons finally got spoken. And not by me. Han Qiao, tallying something, stopped mid-count and looked at her own figures. She said slowly, to no one, wait. The old man's weight came off him at the grave, all of it, at once, and every eye at our end of the trestle went where hers had gone. The noise of the wake covered us. Nobody said the rest of it out loud, so it was said in silence, all the way down. Death closes the debt. Falling can never take a dead man lower. The ledger releases what the grave holds. Say it once and you cannot unsay it. And nobody at that table ever said it aloud again. She caught herself, appalled at her own arithmetic. She folded the tallies away and said, forget I counted that. And we all agreed to forget it, as rooms agree. Which is to say the thought sat in the rafters of every skull present and has never once left mine. There is always a way to make the weight stop. There is always one door at the bottom of the ledger. Su Yin already lived with that door, had walked people through it twice. Now the rest of us knew where it was, and knowing is not a thing that unknows. The stone spent itself 3 days later. It spent itself on the last collar in my original ledger, the one this whole account opened on. Ernyang did the work at her bench under Kong's seal with the house's own license, because I insisted on daylight and law for this one above all. The hold went into the release yoke. The question was asked, purchased by whom, for whom does the wearer consent? And Su Yin, who had carried that iron since before the ditch, who had treated half a city wearing it, who had never once let it slow her hands, said her name and consented in a voice you could have balanced scales against. The collar opened. The hold grayed and sanded away. The old man's answered grief spent in a breath on a bone-setter's neck. Su Yin rubbed the pale band where the iron had kept the sun off, and did the most Su Yin thing ever recorded. She looked at the released iron, asked Ernyang what the house did with these, heard scrap, and claimed it on the spot for splinting metal. It braces forearms in the lanes now. Her own chain turned into splints, the entire woman in one line. Outside the shed she stopped me with a hand on my sleeve, and made the new terms plain, because she does not do gratitude, she does contracts. I am not free because of you, she said. I am free through you. The difference matters. Keep it straight. And from today, the people decisions in this outfit go through both of us, or I take my lanes and my splints and audit you from the outside again. Those are the terms. I said, agreed. She said, witnessed to the street at large, and the street at large being the wash, set it back. The sentence from the wake went into the deepest drawer I own, next to Yan Ru's false weight, face down off the working pages. I hoped sincerely never to open that drawer again. A collector learns early what hope like that is worth on the open market. The record will show what the record shows. Drawers like that do not rust shut. They sit under the day's tallies, patient as unpaid interest, and wait for the season that comes asking. That season was already walking up the switchbacks with its hands in its sleeves. The circle was Fu's arithmetic, in the end, worked out loud at the bench one night between curses. A freed man's true tear can free the next man, he said, if the grief runs deep enough. Stone frees throat. Throat gives stone, stone frees throat. A chain, boy, a chain that feeds itself downhill. And then he put down his file and heard his own words. and we sat in the shed listening to the shape of the only ending this city could afford. A circle of releases, each one paying for the next. No mine, no dairy, no source, no me. It answered everything, including the ladies' terrace arithmetic, because a chain of single releases does not snap the city the way a general unbinding would, one at a time. And the chain had one law that could not be argued with, because Fu's craft and my panel agreed on it to the grain. It runs downhill only. A tier's stone is never deeper than the collar it answered, so the first stone had to come from the deepest grief on the mountain. The heaviest collar had to break first, and every collar below it would follow in sequence. And there was no heaviest collar in any lane or yard or house list. There was a floor of them, 60 steps down a sealed stair, humming its warm silence under everything. I had left that floor once, having freed nobody, holding my cowardice and my proof. The proof had done its work since. Through Kong's hand, through the city's arithmetic, the cowardice had sat in me, accruing. And now the ledger had circled back to it wearing strategy's coat, and the strategy said what the shame had always said. Go down again. This time, bring them up. What that required, I will list the way we listed it that night, because the list is the story. The perimeter anchor of the quiet floor would need to fail. That great binding, sunk in the rock, kept every niche collar keyed. Earnyang's seeded sizing errors had spent a year weakening those fittings on her own quiet initiative. One careful woman's 20-year apology arriving on schedule. The keeper's rotation had thinned, half its men pulled up top to fight the wave. Han Chao held the roots, in and out, timed to the relief bells, and the anchor itself, weakened or not, would still need a blade of a grade this city had never cut, or hands at the very top of the craft. We had no such blade. We had the hands. They came down from the hearth yards on the third night, uninvited with their tools. Because Ba's message to Bai Yue had been 6 words, we are going back for them, and her reply had been her feet. Kong knew. That is the thing I did not learn until later, and it changes the weight of everything. She told him to his face where she was going and what for, review or no review, and the old man looked at her for a long time and said, "Then take the good tongs," and turned back to his bench, deaf and blind by choice, the greatest setter alive, spending his last authority on not noticing. His house, his fire, his student, walking out with his tongs to unmake his life's employer. "The fault is the taking," he had said. He meant it all the way down. I will not write the descent twice. The stair was the stair, the smell was the smell. What was different was us. A year and a half different. We came as a crew this time, 5 of us and the animal, on a night Han Xiao had chosen, with Su Yin's yes carried up from her lanes, because the relief bell would leave 1 keeper to 3 galleries, and we came with a plan that had no version where we left alone. The anchor hall sat behind the sorting benches, and the anchor was a pillar of set stones the size of a hearth. Generations of binding laid one over another, the whole floor's obedience humming out of it like cold off ice. Beiyue read it for what it was inside 20 breaths. Layered, she said. Old work under new botching. The new courses are wave era, rushed, and the fittings, she touched one, are misfit. Sized wrong. Every one of them, sized wrong, by the same hand, wrongly, for years. She looked at me. Somebody has been unbuilding this thing, fitting by fitting, since before we came. I thought of a careful woman at a counter and her Tuesday amnesia and said, work faster. They worked. Bai Ye and Fu, 4 hands between them and 2 of them, the best in the city. Cutting keys, backing out wedges, letting the misfit courses take the load until the load found the flaws. I priced patrol timings with Han Xiao. Ba ran the galleries on soft feet, whispering at niches, get up slow, hold the wall, wait for the word, and the niches heard him. That is a thing I will carry. Hundreds of people who had been farmed past hoping. And a boy's whisper went down the rows, and the rows, one by one, silently, sat up. The anchor did not shatter. Craft does not shatter things, force does that. It let go, course by course, wedge by wedge, until the hum stuttered and stopped. Then the silence changed weight, and down 6 galleries, collar after collar clicked from arm to iron, dead metal on living necks. The keeper of the watch heard the silence too, and did the only wise thing any houseman did that year. He sat down at his own bench and put his hands flat on it and watched. Getting them out took the rest of the night and every route Han Xiao owned. They came up the sealed stair into the cold dark in files, holding each other's belts. Wrapped in every quilt, sack, and rag 6 people could stage in advance, and the first of them reached the tailings gap as the sky grayed and stopped and had to be led, because a person can forget the sky. They came out and out and out, 240 by Ba's count, which is the count I trust, and the city fed them. That is the part I did not build and could not have. The web took them, all of them, before the soup went cold. Chin's trestles were up before the second file surfaced. The trough-head women had fires and broth going. Hollow Row opened the doors I had once kept shut for them. Dung's vigil crowd became a blanket line. The lane elders parceled out floors and walls by their own law. I stood at the tailings gap at dawn, watching the city I had been giving my people to all season. It absorbed 240 ghosts before noon. No part of it needed my hand, and I understood I was watching my own answer to the ladies' terrace, alive, eating soup. The house came at midday, because of course it came. And here the account owes the record a strange page, because what came was Madame Xue, in person, with guards, to the trough square, into a crowd of her own escaped inventory. And she stopped. I watched her price it. The greatest appraiser of consequences in this city, standing before 240 freed, groundless people fed by 500 furious housed ones. With her stone failing citywide, her master in review, her word worth less every hour. Take them back, and the city that was sliding toward the cliff would simply go over it that day, with her name on the push. She stood a long moment in the smell of broth. Then she said, to me, across the crowd, in the voice she had used on the terrace, "Husbandry was always your word, Stone Man, not mine," and she turned and took her guards home, and that was the whole battle. The hardest enemy I ever faced beat herself with her own arithmetic in front of witnesses, because she had never once been wrong about consequences, and was not wrong now. The price of the night came due at dusk, and I paid it standing in the open square. It goes down in the ledger plain, with no rounding. Everything I had built was already spent into the web. That was the season's work. What remained was the last holding, the one I had kept without admitting I kept it. The name, the position, Stone Man, the address where miracles were requested, the ledger's owner, the one the tears looked to. The chain needed a first tier, and the first tier needed the deepest answered grief on the mountain. The deepest grief belonged to the men and women of the quiet floor. And grief is answered, my panel has always said, by a real turning at a real price paid by me. So I gave the last thing at the trough square, out loud, before the crowd and the ghosts and my own household. The broth was still going, and I climbed a trestle bench so every row could hear me price what I was paying. The circle was declared there. Its law stated plainly, each freed throat frees the next, downhill, no keeper, no source, no address. The network's names were named Chin, the trough women, the elders, Su Yin's lanes, Ba's corners, and my part in it was ended, by me, in front of everyone. The Stone Man's office, abolished by its holder, the requests redirected forever to the web that had just fed 240 people without me. I stepped down from being necessary in the same square where I had once fought so hard to matter. And the crowd heard it. And the gray man from the 10th part of this account stood in the front row hearing it. The one who had stood at his circle's edge with his hand open, not reaching. His name is Wen Su. He had been 9 years on the floor. And when the words were done, he walked out of the crowd, took my hand in both of his. He thanked me, by name, with his whole chest, for the sky, for the soup, for the 9th year being the last one, and wept. The tear that came off that man rang on the trough stone like a bell being born, and what lay in the wet was past any grade Fu had ever named for me. A 5, he said, when his voice worked. The first 5 this city has seen in living memory. Grief 9 years deep answered all as to the ground. He would not touch it. Bai Yue would not touch it. Wensu picked it up himself and put it in my palm. He closed my fingers over it the way Su Yin once had and said, "First link, Stone Man. Cut the chain's first collar with it. I am told you know where the heaviest ones are kept." And in my palm, born from the grief my cowardice had once left behind, the first 5 in living memory. The seed of the circle, the stone that could start the chain the entire rest of this account exists to finish. The mountain above us stood emptied of its worst secret. And the morning after was the first, since I came to this world, face down in its tailings, that nobody in Sichuan owed me anything. I was nobody again, holding everything, but the wave had its own ledger and kept its own hours. Bindings were still dying across the tiers that same night, in fine houses and dye wards alike. Each dead stone minted one more furious customer, and the house had no counter left that could make them whole, and the chain had not yet freed a single throat. The 240 were up, wrapped, fed once, and owed a next meal by a city already furious on its own account. The stone in my fist held a night's head start at best. The wave was already spending it. The chain ran like spring water for a month, and I did nothing, which was the work, standing aside as a trade too. I was new to it. Wensu's 5 cut the deepest collar left above ground, an old fighting bond on a caravan man named Ergu, iron that had forbidden his hand to his owner for 20 years. Ergu wept when it opened, and his tear cut the next. A 4, a quarry widow's lifetime bond. Hers cut 2 3s, the 3s cut 4s of a lesser breed, those cut 2s. And the chain branched down the tiers exactly as Fu's arithmetic had promised. Grief answering grief downhill, nobody's property, nobody's license, no keeper, no source, no address. The carter from my first winter stood in the second week's line, his brother gray above the collar and fading. One of the threes cut him loose. He still walked his 11 tails to the trough kitchens after, because some men keep their own books. Han Xiao kept the count. Because somebody had to, and she would have anyway. She stood at chins with her tallies each evening. She called it like a market. 9 collars this decade. 14. 22. One branch stalled at the dye ward, 2 new cutters trained at the trough head, and she charged the freed a commission, 1 copper in 100, invoiced with a straight face for registry services rendered. The lane elders were scandalized. The freed paid it laughing. Chin put the coppers in a jar labeled, in Han Qiao's own hand, proof it worked. It is the only tax in this city's history that people boast of having paid. Then the chain reached Gao Mu and stopped as if it had hit stone. Because it had. The oldest stone there is. Han Xiao's tallies froze at his name, and the branch below him went quiet as a shut ledger. The house had collared him in the wreck of the wave season. His own masters had called in the shortages of a yard he no longer controlled. They bound their loyal overseer over accounts that were only short because everything was short. And the man who had spent 9 years binding orphans took the iron with, witnesses swear, something like relief. A collar meant the house still counted him as worth holding. It was the last employment he had, and his link could not be skipped. The chain runs by grade and breed, strictly, downhill. His iron was the one bond of its weight in the whole lower branch. Below him, 40-some collars waited on his link like carts behind a stalled ox. The mechanics were simple. The cut needed a cutter who wanted him free, actually wanted it. And the wash offered its old warden, discovered it would rather keep the carts stalled. I understood the tier completely. He had bound Ba. He had dried out my friends and fed his own, in that order, always. Half the lanes owed him old bread and older bruises. The half that loved him as you love a hard boss, from a distance, past tense. Love that files itself under gratitude does not cut collars. The chain wanted true stone, and true stone was not in stock. The calculated attempts came first, because a stalled chain breeds cleverness, and I want them on the record as the law demonstrating itself. A freed cooper tried it for civic duty, jaw set, doing his part. The release took, the collar opened. Gao Mu's tear came off him gray and dead, salt before it hit the ground. The link died with it. They refitted the iron, at his own flat request, and the chain's fuel for that whole branch was ash. The law does not read deeds, it reads the field they grew in. Duty is a farm. Han Xiao tried the second way, because she is Han Xiao. She found a man who genuinely owed Gao Mu his son's life from the old Q days. She coached him a week on sincerity, rehearsed the gratitude, staged the witnesses. Salt again, saltier. She stood over the gray crumbs with her tallies and said quietly, "It cannot be faked." And I watched the sentence cost her something structural. It was the last time she ever tried to counterfeit the only currency that matters here. Some educations end loud. Hers ended at a fizzled stone in a yard with 40 collars waiting on her failure. And while the chain stood stalled, the city's bill ran on. The wave had not stopped for our miracle. On the dark of the month, the west heaps caught, a tar store going up in the wind. The wash fought fire with trough water while 3 salt-mad came up out of the spoil like the ground's own fever. A woman died at the sorting benches. A boy lost a hand at the pump line. The fire priced the stalled month for us, in its own coin. Xue worked 2 days without lying down. And every hour of it, 40 unfreed collars stood on the far side of a link nobody wanted to cut. Each of us could name people behind those collars. They would have been at that pump line, free, pulling if the chain had run. Su Yin came to me on the second night, ash to the elbows, and made the human argument, and it deserves its space. Route around him, she said. Break the sequence once. 1 link out of order against 40 freed hands at the next fire. I decide who my hands treat first every day of my life, and the sky has not fallen. Decide. And I said the truth, which helped nothing. It is not my rule to break. The chain is not a policy. It is how the stones are. Downhill only. She looked at me a long time and said, "Then your mountain has worse manners than mine," and went back to her burned. I could have pressed the town, and here is the confession of that season. I knew how. Nobody alive knew better. Pressing a town is collection work, and collection work was my first trade. 7 ways to manufacture a sincere enough cutter stood in my head like old tools on a familiar bench. The widow's gratitude, the cooper's guilt, angle, pressure, delay. My hands knew this work, and every one of those ways ran through the field that grows salt. I had a jar on a shelf with my name on it, proving where that road ends. So I did the hardest thing my 2 lives have recorded. I stood next to a stalled chain, in a burning season, holding the full toolkit, and I kept my hands in my sleeves. Not serenity. Arithmetic, held against the grain of everything I am, one day at a time, while people paid for the holding. The one who solved it had no toolkit at all. She had shame, and a bundle of tally sticks, and 19 years of being his daughter. Xiaofan had kept her father's count since she was a child, the little notched sticks that held every debt of water and favor on the old queue. She came to the trough square on a gray morning, while the attempts were still being argued. She brought the sticks, 9 years of her father's small tyranny in tally form. Then she stood up on the trough head where everyone could see, and she read them out. Not the debts. The other column. The one nobody kept. 3rd year of the drought, she read. 40 measures to the fever lane. Unlogged, out of his own share. The orphan winter. 11 children fed off the count. My mother's rings sold, never once spoken of. The collapse at the old bench. He dug 2 days. He took no water the 2nd day so the diggers could... Stick after stick after stick. She read for an hour, stick by stick, the entire hidden ledger of a hard man's unbanked mercies. Things even he had forgotten, because she had watched him her whole life as daughters watch, keeping the books he would have been ashamed to keep. And the wash stood in the square, hearing the other half of a man it had already finished pricing. Gao Mu stood at the edge of it with his arms folded and his face working. He ordered her with no voice at all to stop, stop, girl, stop. She did not stop. She climbed down, walked to him through the whole watching tier, took the release yoke from the stunned Cooper's hands, and said, loudly enough for the square, "You bound my childhood to a water queue. I have hated you and loved you my whole life, and I want you free more than I have ever wanted anything, Papa. Hold still." And he held still. In front of everyone, the man who had never once obeyed anybody below him held still for his daughter. The collar opened. His tear came off him clean as trough water, ringing, a low true grade of a breed nobody argued about. The link lived, and somewhere behind him 40 collars worth of waiting exhaled. But that is not the moment the square remembers. The square remembers that he caught her hand before the yoke was even set down, and said out loud, "Because the man has never once managed a private feeling, I made the rat of this story, you know? The informer boy. Trained him, paid him, praised him. Everything that came after came out of my water queue, and he looked across the square at me, over his daughter's head, and finished. So whatever this circle of yours is worth, counting man, I am under it twice." I did not answer. It was not mine to answer. Xiaofan answered, folding the yoke, in the tone of a woman closing a full set of books. "Then it is a good thing, Papa, that the circle does not check whose fault things were. It only asks what you want for someone." And it turned out, she looked at the square, daring it, that what I wanted was you. The chain ran on from his link that same day, cart after cart. By month's end, Han Xiao's evening count passed 60. The count no longer came past me for anything, not blessing, not naming, not news. I heard it the way the tear heard it, at Chin's, over soup. Count the stalled season because it holds the finding this whole account was for. The chain, mended in the end by a girl with tally sticks instead of the man who built it, because the machine's one irreplaceable part is a person who actually wants another person free, and that part cannot be manufactured, pressed, purchased, or replaced. I know, because I stood a burning month holding the world's best tools for faking it. The tools were worthless, and the girl was not. 4 names paid for that month while the link stood stalled. I keep them with the others, in the file that never closes. The chain they died waiting on now runs without me, without thanks, without an address. It stopped needing its founder somewhere between a salt crumb and a tally stick, exactly as designed. No design of mine ever cost me more to watch work. And below it all, one thing had already moved in the dark while the square was watching the girl. The new moon had come and gone, twice. No cart had rolled to the shaft, because the house had nothing left to fill one with. Ernyang sent me a single sentence by one of Ba's children, in her flat counter voice. It was the closest thing to joy I ever got from that careful woman. No requisitions this month, none. The dairy has run out of milk before it ran out of cows. The mountain's dining room stood open and unstocked, its keeper house starving above it. Needing nothing from anyone, the circle ate nothing at all and kept setting the city free. What was left standing between Sichuan and its mourning were 2 men. One was the last heir of a falling house with nothing left to inherit but its rage. The other was a gray man with a scale who had one false weight on his string. Both of my remaining accounts came due together at the close of this ledger. The quiet floor did not fall. It closed as markets close at day's end, and the closing took 1 sentence from an old man's bench. Kong's review had reached its last bench that season, and the last bench said what every bench before it had said. He would certify no mindstone, none, new or old, and no setter trained by him, which is every setter alive, would seat what the master would not certify. The house could still farm grief if it chose. It could no longer sell the harvest. Product nobody's hands will touch is not product, it is inventory, and inventory with no buyer is just weight in a basket. And the circle gave true stone, daily, downhill, free, in public, from a fire that answered to nobody. Between the master's no and the chain's yes, the dairy died of arithmetic. No battle. A ledger, closing. Madame Xue shut it herself, in person. It was the last correct pricing of a life spent pricing correctly. She took the loss at full value on her own page, no clerk to carry it for her. The area's governor had begun asking, by intermediaries the tiers could name, why the stone shipments from Sichuan had stopped. And a governor's attention was the one force left that could make everything worse. She chose the smaller ruin, as she always chose. She walked down her own shaft with her stewards, the keepers told it after, and had the sorting benches broken for firewood. Her last good silver pensioned those keepers. She spoke the floor closed at the mine mouth before witnesses, and in the same speaking, with her son standing beside her in his best coat, she named her succession. It was not him. The remaining yards to the master setters in trust, the remaining bonds to be run down by the chain's own law, house releases matching the circle link for link. Her last operation run at a loss on purpose, and the name Xu to end with her, spoken flatly, an appraiser writing off her own line. Xi Ping stood beside her through all of it, in front of the whole mine-mouth crowd. He was being written off in the third person, and I watched him leave his own face, the way Kang Shi used to, except nothing came back to flicker. He came for the chain that night, because it was the only thing left in the city that could still be broken, and breaking was the only trade he had ever learned. The chain's evening link was crossing the middle tier by roof, the way our stones travel now, in a runner's satchel. The runner was Ba. Of course it was Ba, 16 now, chin-scarred, the best feet on the tiers. He was carrying a fresh-cut 3 to a die-ward widow whose link came due at lamplight. Over roofs he had mapped before his voice broke. Xu Ping took the roofs after him with a caravan blade and nothing left to price, and I will say this once because even he is owed his line of record. Alone, unfunded, disinherited, with no hired backs and no mother's purse. The man was finally, for once in his life, genuinely dangerous. Desperation did for him what Silk never had. He ran the boy down across 3 roof lines, cut the satchel strap at the second gap. He had the stone in his fist over the Freedman's Market when the tiles ran out. I was 2 streets behind and not enough. That is the record. I ran the lanes while they ran the roofs, Han Qiao calling the turns from a chimney line, and I arrived at the market square in time to be a witness, which was the only office anyone needed from me. Ba came off the last roof shouting the thing every child of his corners knows to shout. The stone, he is taking the stone. And the market heard it. The market was freedmen. Wen Su's people, chain people, collar scars on half the necks in it, and they did not mob the man on the roof edge. Because mobs break things. They did something I have never seen a crowd do. They organized in about 4 breaths without one word of command. Ladders went up at both gable ends. Carters rolled their wagons under the eaves like sandbags. A wall of hands raised itself under his one line of retreat, patient, terrible, silent. And Xu Ping stood on the roof edge with the chain's next link in his fist. Below stood 500 people he had spent his whole life not seeing. He discovered that they saw him fine and were in no hurry, because there was nowhere on that roof to go. Wen Su climbed to him. 9 years on the floor, freed by soup and a boy's whisper, the crowd's quietest man. He walked the ridge like a man walking his own gallery, sat down an arm's length from the air of everything. He held out his open hand. Not grabbing. Open, the bottom of the mountain, offering terms at the top of a roof. "Come down, Lord," he said, loud enough for the square. "The stone is a woman's Tuesday. You are holding a stranger's better week. It will not carry what you need it to carry. Nothing that small ever does." And Xue Ping, at the end of every line his life had, looked at the open hand and at the wall of patient hands below. He put the stone in Wensu's palm and sat down on the roof of the Freedman's Market. He wept like the child his mother had stopped waiting for. No stone came of it, rage that never found its justice, shame nobody lifted, salt tears, ordinary, human, worthless. And the crowd let him climb down their ladders and walk away unstruck. It was the worst thing they could have done to him and the only kind one. He carries water now on the east lanes for a freedman cooper who pays him in meals. The cooper does not know who his mother was, or knows, and has decided it is not interesting. The city has stopped finding him interesting, which for that man is the complete sentence. I have seen him twice at the trough. He carries competently. 2 full buckets on a yoke, held level the length of the lane, no spill line behind him. It is the first competent thing I have ever seen him do. The widow's link ran an hour late that night and ran. Ba delivered the stone with a strap-cut satchel and an invoice for hazard rates that the chain's registry, meaning Han Qiao, approved without comment. That is how that household says proud of you. Yenru came on settlement day because he would. The house's rundown of bonds was his last commission, every release to be weighed exact against the circle's links, and he executed it as he had executed everything for 20 years. Present, precise, unhurried. A gray man completing a dead house's arithmetic, because the arithmetic deserved completion even if the house did not. Then the last bond of the day was matched, and I did the thing I had carried in my deepest drawer for 8 parts of this account. I stepped into the square, before the settlement crowd, the freedmen, the trough women, my household, and I asked him publicly to weigh one more transaction, his own. I laid it out plainly, no triumph in it, because triumph would have been false weight of my own. The courier's trade seasons ago, information sold, collar released, and the transaction entered on his string as a debt discharge. But no discharge was owed, I said, and no purchase was recorded, and the man himself had hesitated over the entry, and I had watched him hesitate. So weigh it now, steward, on your own scale, by your own rule. What was that information worth on the day, at honest rates, against a courier's small debt? And what does your rule command, when the weights come up uneven, taken from a debtor's side? The square was very quiet. He looked at me for a long moment, the only man in Sichuan who had never once cheated anybody, standing before the one entry he had bent. Then he set up his scale on a barrelhead, in the square's full sight. He weighed it honestly, information at market, debt at record, and the beam came up uneven, heavy on his side, exactly as we both had known it would for years. Taken above the measure, he said, to the square in his level voice. From a debtor. By me. The rule is the rule. And he paid it back as his rule commands, at once, in full. Before witnesses, silver, weighed to the grain, counted into Han Xiao's hands at compensation rates he calculated aloud against himself. Harder than any court would have. And then, the part silver could not carry. He unstrung his weights, the famous string, 20 years of exactness. He laid it on the barrelhead, and he said, a scale with one false weight is not a scale. The house may find a man whose string is clean. And he bowed to the square, the width of a coin, to all of us and none of us. Then he walked out of the trade that had been his entire self, unemployed, unowned, and exact to the last. Han Xiao stood holding the silver with an expression I had never seen on her. A bill she had never thought to draft, paid unasked at punitive rates. She counted it twice, because she is Han Xiao. Then she put one coin of it in Qin's proof-it-worked jar. She gave the rest away by nightfall, to the burned families from the tar fire. Anonymously, badly, getting caught at it twice. It is the only time on record that woman moved money without margin, and if you tell her I recorded it, she will invoice me. The governor's man came at season's end, and the sale he offered was the last temptation this account contains. He came to Han Qiao quietly, as such men come, with a purse and a proposal. The circle's workings, its routes, its registry, its trained cutters, delivered to the area's capital as a franchise under governor's license, with her as its salaried mistress. Everything she has ever priced, offered at the price she had always said everything had. She turned it down flat in one sentence. Then she stood in our shed afterward, furious, trying to explain the sentence to herself with tallies and failing. It does not transfer, she finally said, which was not the reason, and we both knew it. The reason was sitting on her feet, blind and fat, and drinking soup at her elbow, and healing burned hands 2 doors down, and running roofs with a scarred chin. And it does not fit on a scale, and she has stopped trying to weigh it, mostly. On the registry slate that night she chalked, with her own hand, under the refused sum, entry does not close, which, from her, is the whole of the love this account will ever get her to admit. So count it. The final count, called by our registrar at the winter fire, because the circle publishes its books at Qin's now, out loud, as everything true in this city is published. 306 collars cut by the chain at that counting, in one city, in under a year. 41 cutters trained, 11 of them from the quiet floor itself. 240 brought up from the dairy, every one housed. 1 mine closed, 1 dairy closed, 1 house wound down at its own lady's word. And against it, the honest line, read out in the same breath. Because the circle does not lie in its own books, some tens of thousands of collars still standing in Sichuan and the towns beyond. True stone bonds from the old good rock, each one waiting on a link, years of links, a generation of links. The chain does not finish. It only does not stop. We ate at Bayue's fire that night, the entire strange household of this account. Her own yard, hers by deed and by hands. There, an old one-armed man argues with the finest setter in the city about quenching angles. He loses on purpose about half the time. And her newest bench worker is a silent, exact master. He asked for the job with one sentence, the hands still work, and the student decides who they work for. Su Yin came from her lanes, where the deciding is hers and costs her sleep she will not admit to. Boss lay across the doorway so nobody could leave. There were enough quilts. I want that in the record. For the first time in this whole account, there were enough, and one to spare, and the spare hung on the wall, unsealed, like a flag of a small, strange country. I am poor. I am worn through in the places a body wears from carrying winters. Nobody in Sichuan owes me anything, and no line in the city runs through my hands. And yesterday at the trough, a boy asked his mother who I was. She said, "That is the man who keeps the grave plate clean," which is true and enough. And the plate does hold, whatever Bai Yue says about the seat. And the last stone of this account was made 3 days ago, at the trough head, by a laundry girl I have never met. Her neighbor's collar came open under her hands while I happened to be passing with water for the plate. She did not know I was watching. Nobody told her to want her neighbor free. Nobody paid her, pressed her, farmed her. The tear rang on the stone like a coin, like a bell, like the first night in the ditch. She picked it up herself and turned to the next link, and did not need me at all. I stood there with my bucket, unnecessary, complete, and I thought about a man who died at a desk owning nothing but a method. Then I did the last sum of this ledger, paid in full. Say it back, all of you, paid in full.
This is the story of a man who inherited someone else's broken life, and instead of seeking revenge for the sake of power, chose duty, first to save those whom the system had written off, and then to build an order that would endure even without him. The main lesson is simple. True help does not make people dependent on their savior. It restores their freedom of choice, their dignity, and their ability to lift one another up. Power that must be held onto forever becomes a burden and a poison. But a cause that continues to thrive even after you've stepped aside becomes a gift. Translated with Deeple.com, free version.